lost the stream that I was doing, but I'm talking to Khalid Safir, and we're talking about the importance of dialogue and getting perspectives from people who see things in a completely opposite manner from one's own. And one advantage to belonging to a strongly identifying in group is that you have a much more exciting, fulfilling life, one that's more optimized for your own thriving. But the disadvantage is that when you develop ties, they also blind you to what's going on. And I will admit that I don't lose sleep over Palestinian suffering, even though Palestinians have suffered terribly, because I'm a human being who primarily cares about my own group. Now, when I'm confronted with pictures and video and someone articulating, making the case for the Palestinians, then it kind of jolts me out of my normal level of complacency. But I am a convert to Orthodox Judaism. I'm a committed Zionist. And so I don't tend to think much or suffer much when people who are very different from me suffer, until I talk to those who articulately make the case for the other side. So, Khalid, we got cut off, but we were talking about the importance of dialogue. Do you want to jump back in on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, I'm smiling because of your level of honesty that you don't you lose much sleep. I mean, at first I was a little bit shocked, but then you continued, and the level of honesty was quite cool. So you started off with saying, "I don't lose much sleep at the death of thousands of Palestinians," but then you said, when I watch some videos, it jolts my conscience. So that's really honest, um, and it does explain, and you did explain to me in an interesting way why a lot of Zionists, because a lot of people are perplexed as to why so many Zionists don't seem to care about the death of thousands of children, because we tend to be interested in our in groups. There's all sorts of things. So first of all, I would before we got cut off, I was complimenting you. I was really surprised because I didn't know you were a Zionist. You didn't sound like a Zionist, um, because you seem to have reasonably balanced points of view, and you could understand where I'm coming from, and you could understand that killing children wasn't a good thing, um, and you weren't making excuses for it. Um, so that was and then I was complimenting you, and I was saying basically the reason why that might happen, why that happens with you, or why you seem to be so balanced, is because you actually have discussions with other people rather than um, have existing in your own echo chamber, as it were. And then you're also doing something really difficult, which like less than 1% of the population, or far less than 1% of the population, can do, which is actually be on camera and have your points of view articulated through your voices, rather than your voice, your speech, rather than um you know I don't know how many, 50, 100 words or something in a comment that nobody really cares about in the on the in a live chat, because people don't take it as seriously as somebody who can put their face on camera and make their point of view and have a channel, and people can say things about your point of view. Very few people can um, contemplate their ideas and articulate them and have them recorded. That's really difficult, and so that makes you grow up and have more you have to have more reasoned points of view, otherwise you just sound like an idiot on the camera. So there's so many good things there that I'm impressed by, so I appreciate that. And I appreciate that as just another human being, your brother the in humanity, and who hopes for people to be better people for the sake of humanity. So I appreciate that. So and then I was saying the benefit of that to you and me when we exercise that balance, practicing articulating our ideas, having our ideas challenged, etc., is that we grow up in our personal lives. We know how to be more reasoned in our personal lives. We're more thoughtful, less controlled by our emotions. um, I was saying earlier on, a lot of people now, um, have not developed really beyond the age of 2 years old. And that's not just to be insulting. I was trying to explain quickly that until you're 2 years old, you can't negotiate with people who are under two, really. But by the time you're two, um, an expectation grows that you have to negotiate with the rest of the world. And a lot of people now who live or spend all their time communicating in social media, not really communicating in real life. And that doesn't count in work, because in work, you're basically a
Coming
slave.
from
You
a
have to
place.
do what you're told, say what you're supposed to say. You keep your thoughts to yourself. So the work, even if you work in real
What
life,
are
it doesn't
boundaries?
really doesn't count, because you're not really representing yourself, your true thoughts. So most people, they're on social media, they spend about 20 characters insulting somebody on Twitter or whatever it is, or even in this live stream, they might say something and they know nobody will come back to them on their points of view, because it's just like a throwaway, lots of throwaway comments. It's much harder to have your face on camera, say what you think, and have it recorded permanently so people can judge your point of view. So my point is, in short, we really benefit when you put yourself through the ordeal, the intellectual ordeal, emotional ordeal of giving your points of view and having lots of other people challenge them. So I think it's really healthy. I mean, do you think it helps you in your relationships? I have been telling you in the live chat, I was kind of I'm one for pushing people into getting married. Um, are you married yet?
I am
And I
not
like.
married. I've never been married. I've never been able to sustain a relationship longer than a year.
So that's a shame, because you seem to have some of the skills to be able to do that. And by the way, I'm a big fan of, as a Muslim, I'm a big fan of people becoming Orthodox Jews, but it doesn't work for everybody, because I think it's quite difficult to be an Orthodox Jew. You probably have to be born Jewish, or your mother has to be Jewish or something at least. Otherwise, it's pretty difficult. So that's why I recommend most people become Muslim, because it's more open to more people, unless you're um, essentially a racist, which is fine. Most people are racist. They think, Islam's for Jew, brown people, etc. And it takes a lot of people to get over that, and they'll get over that in good times, because it's the fastest growing religion in the world. It's inevitable that they or their children, if they have children, will get over that. But other than that, I do recommend people becoming Orthodox Jews, because then they're more likely to get married, I think, and have more children. Why hasn't that worked for you? I'm intrigued.
It hasn't worked for me for several reasons, but first of all, I want to acknowledge that that my own self-protection is probably going to make saying the truth more difficult. But okay, number one reason, I've had poor health all my life until 3 years ago. So I've been a vegetarian all my life, which has resulted in terrible health, all sorts of health problems. And it was only till I started taking beef organ capsules, just swallowing some beef organ capsules about 3 years ago, all my health problems disappeared within 2 weeks. But if you don't get married in your 20s or 30s, it's much harder to get married later on. Also, if you don't get launched into a career in your 20s or at least your 30s, it's much more difficult to launch. So my life never launched like a normal person, in large part because I was bedridden by chronic illness, which I believe sprang from my vegetarianism in my 20s. So from basically age 22 until 27, I had to drop out of UCLA, and I was bedridden. And then when I resumed life, I was only at about 60% of normal health. So I've had a very diminished, shrunken life, which has made it difficult for me to take on normal responsibilities like a career and a wife and a family. Like most women don't want to saddle themselves to a guy who's got chronic illness. So that's one reason.
How
Go
are
ahead.
you? Go on. I hear a lot of. I like to be like, so politically incorrect is way more fun. So I'm gonna call you a white person essentially.
Sure.
I hear a lot of white people say this thing. Like, I'm gonna have somebody on the show on my live stream later on. I was having a conversation with him. It's like, oh, for the last 30 years, the reason why I haven't got married is because the last 30 years I've been on this drug or this tranquilizer and blah 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 and all this kind of stuff. And I keep hearing it all the time, and I'm thinking, my thoughts are BS. Get over it. Like, what the hell? I don't believe you're like. I'm gonna be a bit disbelieving because the reason why it doesn't really benefit me to disbelieve you, right? Okay, but I feel like there's too many people for this to be true to say that for the last 30 years of their lives they were on drugs and they were bedridden, for example, all this kind of stuff. So I question that. I don't think you were totally in your bed for the last 30 years. And I think you had an ability, but that's the past. So I'm interested in the future. I suppose so. I'll make that point, and then my second point, very briefly, is like, where are you now financially? Because the reason why I love pushing people into getting married, because it solves everything else. Like, to be married, you have to have a clear direction. You have to be attractive to the opposite sex, and you get attracted to the opposite sex. Most people don't understand by having a clear direction, purpose, belief in God, and so many other bits and pieces. People don't understand. That's why I do loads of live streams to explain that slowly. So my question is, so I'm going to ask you two questions, which is it really true you're totally bedridden for the last 30 years? And secondly, do you have money now? Because maybe we could this would be a cool thing to get you married, because you can still get married to an older person. It's good to be in a relationship for many different reasons.
Okay, so I was not totally bedridden, but from 22 to 27, I was bedridden about 20 hours a day on average. And
That's a long time ago. How old are you now?
I'm now 57.
So that's history. Who cares about that?
Well, you don't care about that, but other people
No, I do care about
may
it,
be
but I don't
interested.
think that counts. I don't think you should use that as an excuse that you're after 27. Since 27 to 55, there's decades in between.
Okay, so I think you would prefer other answers that you would regard as more honest. So I will give you that I got enchanted by sexual promiscuity. So
Oh, okay.
during my premium marriage years, when I was in the most social space, so after I made a partial recovery from chronic fatigue syndrome, so from age 27 to 30 in particular, I was tremendously promiscuous. And then from 30 to 42, I was a serial monogamist, but I was going from relationships that would last 6 months to a year. And so I had sex with a lot of women, a lot of beautiful women, and I got drunk on that, and it warped me. I remember the profound difference between the time that I'd only been to bed with one woman up until age 27. And then once I went to bed with that second woman, I was just enchanted by the erotic possibilities that were out there in the world. And I felt I've been cheated from the normal level of erotic possibilities that should, go to someone belonging to an elite university. And I'm going to go get mine. And that drove me, and it warped me. And so in my mid 40s, I finally entered a 12-step program that dealt with sex addiction and love addiction. And it took me a year or two to develop some substantial sobriety from that disabling addiction. So my addiction to promiscuity made it more difficult for me to get married, not in the sense that I was out there committing illegal behavior. I've never been arrested. Not in the sense that I was cheating on people that I was with, but it was just intoxicating, and it warped me. Somehow, like sexual intoxication, erotic intoxication, was a tool that I developed very early on in life to cope with my anxiety or frustration or anything that wasn't working. And so it started out as a tool that probably helped me get through some difficult times when I was just a kid, but it very quickly became a maladaptive habit, and it warped me. So I would say that's something. Second, due to my poor health, due to my ADHD, which I only got diagnosed and dealt with about 6 months ago, I was not functioning as a normal person. I was regarded as generally weird. And when you're weird, you are not a lot of fun for other people to be around. And so I became socially isolated, which predisposed me to a life of fantasy to try to deal with the shame of failing in life. And so I spent much of my life in delusions of grandeur and fantasy and constructing this online persona. And that did not adapt me for connecting with people in the real world. And so 10 years of therapy kind of helped me a little bit start to break down all these barriers that I had against normal levels of intimacy. So I developed a grandiosity. I developed an escape to fantasy. If it wasn't erotic fantasy, it was fantasy about how powerful and important and strong and valuable and important, how big I was, how many views I got. And I did that to try to wall off shame, but it wasn't a mature response to life. So I would say it's only in the past few years, in particular in the last, say, 6 months since getting diagnosed and medicated for ADHD, that my tendencies to a general weirdness, which has been off-putting to so many people, have substantially reduced. And I do believe now I'm in a much better position to get married.
Cool. I think you're ready, man. Sounds good. Do you say you're 55?
57.
57. I mean, I've got a friend who's 55, he's really young. I'm 43. I don't think we're old at all. In fact, often we're in a better position than a lot of 20 somethings. We've got more money usually. I don't know where you are on that kind of stuff, but you're definitely experienced. You got a learning curve. I'm a Muslim. I don't support, screwing around. Is that a British term? I don't know, but promiscuity, right? But
Yeah.
you learn, you make your mistakes, and there's a verse in the Quran that says you can turn your bad things into good when you go towards righteousness. So you can learn many things that a lot of people won't understand from your mistakes if you have an intention to move forward. So great. I think that, I mean, you definitely have a lot of social skills to be able to have a relationship with lots of women that you wouldn't have unlearned, but you've just learned to balance that skill, would you say?
Yeah, and I'm in solid financial position. I'm not rich, but I'm financially solid, solvent. Don't have debt, so I'm in a good position there. And yeah, I think I'm in a good position to get married.
And you're extra good position because you're an ultra orthodox Jew, where you don't have to do so much hunting, and the quality of the people you're going to get, i.e., Jewesses who've been trained by their dads to behave and be obedient and stuff like that, and have children rather than look for the next best thing every 5 seconds. You're in a much better situation than the average Westerner. Would you agree with that?
I would say that I'm in a better position than I've ever been. I'm not going to say that I'm in a better position than the average Westerner, but here's something that I wanted
No,
to
in terms of the pool, the women, the number of good quality women you have, i.e., religious women, you have access to. So maybe I'm jumping ahead. Are you part of a ultra orthodox Jewish community? Yes or no?
Somewhat, but I would not describe myself as ultra orthodox. I would describe myself as kind of just moderate orthodox, kind of middle of the road orthodox. So that one distinguishing characteristic, if people don't know the difference, is that the ultra orthodox will dress in a very distinctive way. They generally won't go to university, and their lives are highly insular. And so I have a lot of friends and acquaintances outside of the world of Orthodox Judaism, and my dress is pretty similar to anybody else.
Hmm. Interesting. I like
Oh,
to be super practical. I'm just thinking,
mhm.
would ultra Orthodox Jewesses be, or older ones potentially be interested in marrying you, or even younger ones? Why not?
Yeah, some would. On the other hand, there's what happens when people Google me. So if
Ah,
anyone Googles me, there are still two websites out there that are still posting on a near daily basis covering the pornography industry. So for 10
yeah.
years, I made my living blogging about the pornography industry. So I wasn't doing porn video reviews, but I was interviewing people in that industry or interviewing people affected by that industry. So from 1997 to 2007, during the course of that time, I started two different websites, lukeford.com and lucasback.com, that are still operating, that still essentially have my name on it, that I have absolutely nothing to do with. I sold the domain names. I wanted to move on from that arena, but those are still things that come up if anyone Googles me.
Sure.
So
I mean, not everybody Googles anyway. But anyway, besides that, because I've got a very good close friend who's ultra Orthodox Jew, but he doesn't believe in Judaism, right? So there's a big spectrum of people who, on the surface, count themselves as ultra Orthodox Jews. And I would say that's probably the same for women. There's a lot of people who probably might accept you. They would say, like, that's your past, you changed. Are you making an effort to get married?
I'm making a moderate effort, but this is how I would phrase things, and this is another point that I want to bring up. One, I'm only going to be moderately disclosive of my real life
Of course.
because I do put my own personal interests ahead of the interests of the show. I
Cool.
adjust my live streaming to my life. I don't adjust my life to my live streaming. But second, I view my inability to get married, my life as a bachelor, primarily as a symptom of a deeper thing rather than the primary problem. I view our problems as not primarily our problems. Our problems are symptoms that we prefer to get
Very
obsessed with
cool.
rather than the deeper issues. And the deeper issue, I think, for me, primarily comes down to an overwhelming and maladaptive tendency to a selfish life. And one reflection of my selfishness is my bachelorhood. But that's just a symptom of this deeper issue of selfishness that has corroded and corrupted my life.
Cool. That's so honest. Not many people can be that honest. Yeah. And that's why I do these marriageability classes, because it's not just about dealing with the surface issues, it's going to the root issues. Like the number one thing, if you want to solve all your problems, you can tell me if you disagree with this, is fear of God. So to have fear of God, you have to have a very clear reality or awareness of God, which is scientifically the most common sense belief that there must be a creator to all this universe, or doesn't come from nothing. Um, and if you have a very clear awareness that there is a God, that your conscience isn't an accident, but God telling you what's right and wrong and stuff like that, and there's so many other logical ways of looking at it that actually make you think that you should have fear of God, that would solve a lot of problems. My point is that I totally agree. You got to work on the root issues. And if people are wondering what are the fundamental root issues, if you can solve it, is an awareness of God, number one. Would you agree with that? Kind of that could solve the, for example, you talked about selfishness, which it comes naturally to Westerners because that's the propaganda we've been fed, that we'll be happy if we are selfish, right? If places where I am, like in the Middle East and hotter countries, people are more social, but they're more useless at other things. They're not as productive, right? So there's problems in different societies, right? So to overcome this weakness of our cultural upbringing, I'm quite selfish as well. I have to overcome that as well in many ways, right? A belief in God can give you that wider perspective, because selfishness is a short-term way of thinking. What do you think?
I think that's true for some people, but I believe a more universal truth is that the primary problem is lack of ease with oneself. People who are at ease with themselves and are atheists tend to have good relations with their family, good relations with their extended family, good relations with their friends. They know to avoid people who treat them badly, and they know to be open to people who treat them well. So I think the primary issue, and this sounds very Californian, is the ability to be at ease with oneself. And if you interact with people, you know how uncomfortable it is to spend time around people who are not at ease with themselves, people who are, grandiose, or people who have a terribly distorted sense of themselves, people who hate themselves, people who are trying to put out one message when their behavior and their language puts out a completely different message. So to me, the fundamental, more universal issue is that a substantial portion of the population is not at ease with themselves. Therefore, they're incapable of developing relationships with other people. Now, for some people, they will learn to become more at ease with themselves if they develop an appropriate fear of God, because that will help them get their priorities straight. But I know too many atheists who are leading upstanding more moral lives than I am. There are too many atheists who I admire the quality of their personal lives and their good relationships with their friends and family and community. And so, to me, the fundamental issue is the lack of ease with oneself. And for some people, religion and fear of God can help with that. But plenty of people practice religion and are still terribly ill at ease with themselves and with other people.
I would say statistically, lack of so that there can always be all these relative exceptions, but statistically, if you just look at um, the demographics of Western societies and consider who are having the most children, it would be religious people,
Yes.
and people who are not. So I like to, because you can always like you. It's always like, oh, people go, I'm an atheist and I'm wonderful and blah blah blah. And nobody can really inspect you, or who have, not talking about you because you're not an atheist, but like specific examples. And you're pointing out X, Y, and Z. Of course, there are lots of good atheists, right? Um, but what works in general is basically believing in God. Okay. And people might be wondering, why would believing in God work? Because it gives you a long term perspective and many other things. It also gives you, how can you say, clarity on a lot of things. So if you are not, so I, the whole not being at ease is due to a myriad of things, a myriad of things. One of them, major things, is confusion. Westerners are really confused, and you will be confused if you don't believe in God or have a set of values. Because what you have to do, therefore, if you don't believe in God and you don't have these religious values, you have to do the impossible, which is to create a set of values that actually make sense in your own lifetime. That's basically impossible because it's so complicated. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, I just know too many people who believe in God, ostensibly fear God, are religious, and are highly dysfunctional.
Oh
So,
wow.
what's your experience? Do you also know a lot of people who are religious and God fearing and are highly dysfunctional, or is that very much the exception in your experience?
I see people on a spectrum, but generally I would say that religious people um are highly more functional. Um and I think people are not always judging properly. Like, okay, so if I'm at Speaker's Corner and I go around and I've got the right metrics, and the metrics are you married? Are you in a stable relationships? Do you have kids? These are my metrics. People don't like those metrics, right? If I ask the average atheist, they won't be married. They're pretty old, 55, 60, whatever, right? Maybe I shouldn't say old, but like, but they don't seem to be getting anywhere close to getting married, right? If I talk to the average Muslim at Speaker's Corner, they're married, they've got kids, and they might be dysfunctional in different ways, but in the spectrum of things, they're doing much better than the average white person, let's just say. Um, so, yeah, I disagree. I would say, according to the statistics, religious people do way better. And by the way, so my ultra orthodox Jewish friend who doesn't believe in Judaism, he's not married and he's older than me. So it's like, you do have to scratch underneath the surface and really analyze people better. Maybe that's the mistake you're making. I think you're making a mistake in that sense. I think you're analyzing people incorrectly.
So, out of the religious people you know well, what percentage of them do you have, say, more admiration than disgust?
I don't have. Okay, so this is a thing you said earlier on. Like, you might feel uncomfortable with people who are ill at ease with themselves. I'm a Londoner. Everybody's basically, most people are ill at ease with themselves, right? So first of all, I'm not uncomfortable with them. I just have sympathy for people. I've been brought up with this idea of love for all, hatred for none, which is essentially an Islamic idea. Although people might not realize it if they look at the news, but that's always propaganda anyway. Um, so I have, did you say disgust? I have disgust for nobody. I have sympathy for other people. I have Zionist friends who come, like a Zionist friend who regularly, until recently, he's just taking a break, would call me just to talk about his personal life. And I completely disagree. He's the kind of Zionist who thinks it's okay to kill lots of children and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
intelligent to some extent, right? He thinks it's acceptable for whatever reasons, right? I completely disagree with him, but I still have love for him because I see him as a human being. And the way you can have love for other people is realize that you've got millions of flaws. I have millions of flaws myself. Like, you don't know my flaws. I think we talked about this before, right? Um, so I don't have disgust for anybody. Um, yeah, just working on people, working as best as I can out of duty and love. That's it.
Okay, so I'm thinking about someone I know quite well, my father. My
Hmm.
father was unable to relate to people who did not share his religious perspective on life. And so I don't have disgust for that, but I certainly don't admire it. I wouldn't wish that kind of dysfunction on anyone.
Yeah, and don't you feel pity for him? I bet he suffered for his limitations.
Yes, I have pity for him. Also, my father was a very accomplished public speaker, but he also had no interest in talking to people who wouldn't be an audience, who wouldn't take his advice. So my father was kind of a professional advice giver and professional speaker, a Christian evangelist, but he was not comfortable if people weren't open to his advice. So he was most comfortable when he was speaking publicly. He was, quite ill at ease interacting with people who did not share his religious perspective on life and did not seek his advice. And so, yeah, I just saw that as uh, very
A
sad.
kind of hypocrisy.
Well, not so much hypocrisy, just sad and dysfunctional. But I
Yeah,
mean, I could see how one could see it as hypocritical.
sure. Right. So, okay, fine. My dad's got issues. I've got issues. Everybody I know's got issues, me included. We all got millions of issues. So what? What's the next? What are we going to do about it? Are we going to move forwards or cry about it?
Okay, the point is that religion is not helping many people with these issues. That many people turn to religion to solve issues that would be better dealt with through other modalities, such as perhaps psychotherapy or a 12-step program or some other medication or
You've already
some
said
other
that's
mode.
not true.
I'm sorry?
You've already seen the massive kind of demographic evidence that if you're a Muslim, for example, you're going to have double the number of children, at least in the UK, right? We've got like
Hmm.
roughly 5% of the children, 5% of the population, 10% of the children. Okay, everybody else is halving in numbers, right? So there's something there. And I think we shouldn't overcomplicate it and deny ourselves that, because the more we deny this kind of stuff, the more we can't access that kind of reality and benefit from it, right? So we know it makes a difference, and we know why it makes a difference. Even psychologists, atheist psychologists, I mentioned it last time on the live stream, search up big thing evolutionary benefits of religion, right? You'll see a top, I can't remember which university, but he's a really famous guy, psychologist, atheist psychologist professor, and he's like, he says he questions why people are still atheist, and himself included, despite the many benefits of being religious. So let's not deny that, because we make our lives difficult and we want to move forwards with our lives, right? So definitely I would say, let's keep it simple. Religion is great for you. It gives you a whole set of values that have been tried and tested for thousands of years. Fantastic. Yes, there are people who don't entirely benefit. How many kids did your dad have?
Three.
Oh, okay, it's better than two, right? It's like kind of he reproduced to a level that is greater than, like, you know what I mean, increased in numbers. Do you know what I mean? Demographic, whatever the value is, or whatever the word is, right? That's pretty. It's okay. A bit low for the ultra orthodox, but I do understand being ultra orthodox is difficult, because you have to have a belief which is a bit weird, that you're the best in the world and God loved you more than everybody else, and it's really hard to actually believe that kind of stuff. So that's why I pretty recommend becoming a Muslim. It's just far more reasonable. Like, you believe in all the other religions in the past, you know, had some truth behind them, because God always talked to people. He didn't just talk to a few people, and just the rest of the human race was like some waste product or something. I don't know what how do you As an ultra-Orthodox Jew, how do you look at the rest of humanity that's not Jewish?
Okay, number one, I'm not ultra orthodox. I
Oh,
moderate orthodox. I look at
moderate.
the I look at the rest of humanity as having a pathway to the next world. That what God primarily cares about is how people behave, not how they believe. But I do believe that every group regards itself as special, regards itself as playing a special role in the universe. That every group believes that it has some special path to God or to the transcendent or to a particular hero system. So I would expect that Muslims would believe that their religion is the most true religion and that they enjoy a
With a
special
caveat.
relationship with God.
So the Quran said, "You're the best of people because how you." I can't remember the words now. Because of how you serve humanity. So you don't become good just by being having the label.
Right. But I'm sure that the Quran says many different things, but would you not say that overall Muslims regard themselves as belonging to the best, the most true religion in the world? I would hope so.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like the way I see religion is like going to a gym. Like just because you go to a gym. So first of all, as a Muslim, you have to always reflect, never see yourself as definitely going to heaven. No Muslim would anybody who knows anything about Islam, okay, would know that it's God's final decision, and we're always observing something called taqwa, which means constantly reflecting on all your bad things. So we're not never certain that you're going to go to heaven, first of all. So nobody's saying, oh, we're the best in that sense. But we see religion as a way, it's like a camp or a community that can benefit people. So yeah, we're going to say, yeah, this is good for you. We recommend it. We're benefiting it from it that way. But it's not like a supremacist ideologies like we're better than you, therefore you should die. It's the opposite. We're Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was told, you have not been raised or been sent except for the good of all creation, not even just like human beings, everything. So there's not that supremacist ideology. It's just like, just help people. That's it. And yeah, that's better. That's better than an ideology that says only some people are good and everybody else, are terrible. So I don't think there's nothing wrong with that.
You don't believe that Islam, like every other hero system, like every other religion, contains considerable elements of supremacy?
Yeah, I suppose I could get the verses of the Quran out, but it says you are the best of people, basically because you help people. So that's the only level of supremacy. Like that's not a bad thing. Like it's a good people. Okay, I think in the West we don't know how to analyze things properly because we get over tied up in sort of weird labels. Okay, we want if you're promoting a gym, okay, the gym is the reason why I talk about gym is because that's talking about physical workout. We're talking about spiritual workouts, which is a religion, right? Okay, you want to be able to promote the best gym, and how do you promote it? Oh, it's got the best exercise things, whatever, really good fitness instructors and all this kind of stuff. And then you promote it. You say that's good. And you want to be able to do that. People want to know that, right? And that's all we're talking about. You're not going to say, oh, you're a supremacist because you support X gym. That's the wrong way of labeling it. Do you see the problem with it? It's not a helpful way of looking at things. The helpful way of looking at things is what is the best, and it's not I've already said it's not supremacist that in the sense that I'm better than you as a human being, because all Muslims are never certain that they're going to go to heaven. There are the Quran tells them to be in constant fear of God's judgment, right? So it's not that kind of supremacist religion. It's supremacist only in the sense of this is the best. Everybody join in. It's really good for you. That's what it is. Do you get the idea?
Yeah, I get that you're practicing apologetics, and I'm
I don't know what
practicing
that means
trying to.
actually. Can you explain what that means? What do you
Yeah,
mean by practicing
apologetics means
apologetics?
that you're making a case for your religion. So there are Christian
I'm
apologists who
making a
make.
case for humanity. I'm trying to help humanity. It doesn't benefit me.
I mean, anyone who's knowledgeable about Islam is not going to. No, not anyone. But people who are not Muslim, let's say people who are not Muslim, not Christian, or not Jewish, would see probably equal amounts manifesting differently of supremacism in all three religions. And to say that Muslims are not supremacist, I think is absurdly out of touch with reality. It's part of
What's
making a
wrong with
case
it?
for Islam that is not inherent to it, but it's just the way people work. Everybody regards their own group as superior.
Okay, so let's talk about, is there anything wrong with being supremacist if the definition of supremacist is that recommending what is most helpful to humanity and not thinking you're inherently automatically better than somebody else just because of a label? What's wrong with being supremacist by that definition?
Nothing, but I don't think there's
Great.
anything wrong with
Problem
being
solved.
supremacist, even if you think you're better. I think every group regards itself as superior. You are wise in making the case for Islam in not saying that out loud. So if people want to make a case for their group, they shouldn't say that out loud. But the way all group identities work is that you do
I'm not
regard yourself
hiding
as better
anything.
than other people.
I'm not hiding anything.
Well, I think you are. There are considerable supremacist elements in Islam. I'm not a scholar of Islam, but anyone just has to look at the way that Islam is practiced as opposed to just a particular theory of Islam to recognize that for the past probably 50 years, Muslims are far more willing to kill on behalf of their religion than any other group. And that's not a criticism of Muslims. They punch above their weight. Islam is not the largest religion in the world in terms of devotees, but it's the most influential in large part because there are a substantial number of Muslims who are willing to kill on behalf of Islam, and they have successfully intimidated the rest of Muslims from repudiating them.
Okay, so that's an interesting perspective. I'm not sure if it's necessarily reality, right? Okay, because consider how many Muslims there are, a couple of billions, right? I can't remember how many, right?
They're about
And if they're
1.2
all
billion. Yeah.
1.2 billion, right? So we're not all killing people. It's not like our best hobby. We don't explode or, in our spare times and stuff like that. So the point is that's kind of a skewed way of looking at the world, because if the people who do the most killing in the world historically, do you want to guess who they are? Which category of people?
I wouldn't know. It would depend on how you measure it. I'm sorry?
Atheists. Think of communism, the most deaths ever, Mao, all these kind of people, Stalin, atheists, right? I would say the current the current wars in stealing oil. What religion is that? That's not Christianity. The Christian, if it was real Christianity, that would be the worst possible war, because if you listen to Jesus, you attack, if somebody hits you, you have to offer the other cheek. That would be the funniest war in the world, right? So it's not Christianity, it's not Islam doing all these wars. All the current wars at the moment, the oil wars, they're nothing to do with religion. Was World War One or two religious?
No, I don't believe it was primarily
So
a
we're,
religious
we're
war.
misrepresenting reality at our own detriment. So we're losing because we're not portraying reality properly. Um, so, so the idea that Muslims are eager to kill people just because they're firm in their faith, it's just completely wrong. I think a clearer, better understanding is that, for example, studies show that Muslims are most charitable category of people, at least in the UK, right? They give the most to charity. That's more representative of the ideology, because we don't all kill people, us Muslims, but we do
Right.
give more
I
charity.
never said, and certainly do not believe that Muslims are eager to kill people. I said that Muslims, compared to other religions over the last 50 years, have been more willing to kill in the name of their religion. I don't know of any other religion that threatens to kill people because someone's written a novel like the Satanic Verses. I just don't. I'm unable to summon any other religious equivalent to the Islamic
Sure,
reaction
I
to the
I
Satanic
think
Verses.
no, I don't want to like pretend that there's no truth to what you're saying. Like there's lots of there in a billion and 1 point whatever billion people you said, right? There's going to be a minority of people who want to kill people, right? Or maybe even more than a minority in certain situations, right? But think about it. The Satanic Verses came out when I was a kid. I think in the 80s, 90s. I can't remember. 90s must be the 99.
1989.
1989. Cool, right? Okay. How many people got murdered for that? Like next to nobody, and there are lots of Muslims around. It just doesn't really represent reality, but you get if there's like 20 people protesting and saying death to, I don't know, whoever, right? They'll get all the attention. They'll zoom in and make it as if those are 1,000 people on the streets, but it's only 20 people. So it's not really representative, even though I do think a lot of Muslims are a little bit mental sometimes, as a bit crazy. So don't want to say there's no truth to it. Yeah,
But
and
here,
also,
let me just
yeah,
do a
go on.
quick rejoin to that. The point is not that hundreds of thousands of people died over the satanic verses. The point is that there are no powerful Muslims condemning or opposing that that fatwa. That essentially the most dedicated Muslims who are the most willing to make the case for killing someone for publishing a novel, they face no substantial opposition in Muslim life.
Cool. I'm not sure who did the what was it, the Ayatollah
The
Khomeini or
Ayatollah
something, right?
Khomeini.
And most people don't really listen to him anyway, right? So there's like that's a Shia group, okay. Shia relative minority, but think about it. No, even the Shias are not following that fatwa. So they're not going to have the voice to say Ayatollah Khomeini, I don't care what you think, because nobody even heard them. Like if you make a video and say I don't care what you think, you'll get one view. So you wouldn't even know all these people who disagree. But you can see people, you can say voting with their feet, like through their actions by not killing people, not attempting to kill people, who are reading the book, right? They're just not following it. So in practice, nobody really cares what Ayatollah had to say. So there's no point in them condemning. In practice, I mean, there is some point. I condemn it. It's against the fundamental teachings of Islam. I was going to paste something. I'm going to paste a couple of things. Can I put it in the
Yeah, put
comments
it
or
into
something?
the chat. Feel free to
Okay.
add any links. But
It doesn't show. Okay, but I'll put in the. Okay, so first of all, oh no, wrong click, wrong video. I think that's your one. Sorry. Copy, paste. I was going to first of all quote the so-called supremacist verse of the Quran. So I'll read it out aloud as well, but put it in the chat as well.
okay, so
Maybe.
why don't you go ahead and do that, and I'll make a point that won't be
Oh, I've
too.
pasted it and I'll read it. I've read it. I've got it already. So it says, "You are the best of people, raised for the good of mankind or humanity." Okay, you enjoin what is good and forbid evil and believe in Allah. And if the people of the book, that means the Jews and Christians, and maybe some other people have got a book, it would have surely been better for them. Some of them are believers, some of them, but most of them are disobedient. Right? So it's like, that's the supremacist idea, that you are good only because you actually benefit humanity more than anybody else. You actively forbid good, I mean, encourage good and forbid evil to all of humanity. So I don't mind that kind of definition of supremacist. It's good to compete in those kind of things. It's not a big deal. No big deal. I should probably give the number for people's own references. That's 3,110. I'll put that in the chat. So Quran 3. That maybe.
Okay, so go ahead and put that in the chat,
Yeah,
and
go on.
I'll make
Sorry,
a
good.
point.
Well,
So
I've done that. Go on. Go carry on.
right, so I'm sure you can also find verses in the Quran which would, on the face of it, say things that are the opposite of that, and
No,
so
you can't.
okay,
Find
and
it and we'll debate that.
okay, and this reminds me of many discussions between Christians. I grew up with a father who was a Christian polemicist. So my father had 2 PhDs, one in rhetoric from Michigan State University. So you can imagine what dinner table conversation was like with a self-made man who had a PhD in rhetoric. He also did a PhD in eschatology, meaning teachings of the books of Daniel and Revelation about the time of the end. And my father loved theological argument. My father loved argument in general. He loved theological disputation in particular. And this is how it would go typically in my Seventh-day Adventist upbringing. Well, what do you do with Romans chapter 1, verse 7? Well, what do you do with Colossians 8, 7? Well, what do you do with Daniel 6, 14? Well, what do you do with Matthew chapter 3, verse 7? So I'm not a huge fan of proof texting, because you can find texts in any religious tradition that will say one thing or another. I don't believe that I don't look at Islam, Judaism, Christianity as primarily being represented by their religious texts. I look at these 3 religions as primarily being represented by the behavior of the people who identify as Jewish, Christian, and Muslim, and that enables one to avoid the no true Scotsman fallacy. So whenever Christians do bad things, Christian apologists will typically say, well, no Christian can do something bad. That just shows they're not a Christian. And Jewish apologists will say, no true Jew could do something this heinous. It just shows that they are in denial of the basic teachings of Judaism. And Muslim apologists can say, well, no true Muslim would ever do anything heinous. This violates this text in the Quran. But there are religious
What is the
texts, and then
definition
there
of
are
a
how
Muslim?
texts are put into practice. Sorry, go ahead.
That whole idea that you just represented falls apart because you won't be able to define a Muslim if you don't go back to its text, which is the rule book or definition of a Muslim. The text defines what a Muslim is. But I don't completely dispute whatever you're saying. Like, Muslims should behave and they represent their religions. And I've already said, although I'm a persecuted type of Muslim, so we get killed in places like Pakistan or Muslim majority places, right? As heretics, whatever you want to describe it, right? And that's terrible, and it reflects badly on those kind of Muslims, right? They, like, if you want to, define a Muslim, you won't be able to if you define it by their behavior, because there's so many different kinds of Muslims, and everybody define, there can be all sorts of people who consider themselves Muslims, and I don't know, they could be doing pretty much anything. So you won't be able to define a Muslim or a Christian or a Jew or anybody if you don't have something in black and white. And the claim that essentially that the text can be interpreted any way you want, that's usually born out of ignorance and just copying pasting things from Islam websites or anti-Jewish websites. But I'm, for example, in a group of people who are not necessarily even Muslims, who have different backgrounds. We contemplate the Quran and debate it and whatever. I don't think anybody in the group thinks that in Islam you are able to go and kill people who are non-combatants and without, a case for self-defense. These things are pretty clear. It would probably be good to. I'm happy for people, anybody in the chat. I can't see the chat for some reason, but anyway, anybody in the chat, or just come to my channel, invite me to a discussion, come up with all your anti-Islam quotes or something, and then we can discuss them.
Right, and so I would make the same case against people who condemn a religion on the basis of selective quotes as well. You have to, I would say, be pragmatic and look at the results. And I'm sure for some people, Islam improves the quality of life. For other people, I would suspect that it reduces the quality of life. So, Khalid, I'm aware of people I know who've become fervent Christians, and it's made them less pleasant to be around. It seems to have reduced the quality of their life. I know people who've become fervent Orthodox Jews, and they become nastier and meaner and less pleasant to be around. So often religion does improve the quality of someone's life, but at the same time, in a substantial number of cases, religion seems to have deformed people. Are you familiar with that, or are you only familiar with religion making people better?
Yeah, it's a good point. I'm trying to think. So it's very hard to find. The number of practicing Jews and Christians is so small that you have to really think of in the few examples. But the people who are lifelong Christians, if I'm thinking about those, and they're very few, they're actually really nice people. I'm only thinking of one couple at the moment. I'm really struggling. Actually, now I'm thinking of two. My old neighbors when we were kids, so I can barely remember them properly. But really, there are very few of those people anyway. They're generally reasonable people if they were lifelong. But to convert to Christianity is a bit of a weird thing. Like, doesn't make sense. Like, how do you believe three and three is one? If you convert to being an ultra-Orthodox Jew, generally maybe means you think you're better than the rest of everybody else, and that's kind of not a healthy viewpoint. So I can see that might be damaging in some ways. But not all ultra-Orthodox. There are many ultra-Orthodox Jews who are against the Zionist cause as well, and they seem to be really nice people. So, like, there's one guy who's I know. Well, I don't really know, but yeah, I know. I had a Jewish neighbor. He's a, what do you call it? The ones who are really liberal. I can't remember what they call
Yeah,
it. They was
Reform Jew, secular
Reform
Jew.
Jew.
Yeah.
I think, and I went to his house. He's got, Torahs all over the place and stuff like that. But his family is quite liberal, and then I don't think they really practice it. Otherwise, other than going to synagogue, I went to a synagogue with him. Um, and just generally a nice person. I think though religious values do ground you. So I would say lifelong practitioners, yeah, they're good. The people I remember, right? If somebody converted to it, and I really can't remember. I know one person who converted to Christianity, like an Asian person. It's really hard. The numbers are so small. So I'm not sure. Have you really seen that many people who converted to Christianity?
Yeah, because my dad was a Christian evangelist, and when he'd get
Oh,
together with other Christian evangelists, they'd compare the number of baptisms, right, the number of conversions they'd done. That
mhm.
was their way of
Maybe because
measuring
I'm a
their
Londoner.
status.
I'm a
Yeah,
Londoner, and everybody's like leaving Christianity so fast you can't believe it. So maybe that's my personal experience.
yeah, we all have a different personal experience. But have you seen close up a deforming effect on some people's lives when they become more religious Muslims, or does it only make people better?
Oh, no, okay. So so from Speaker's Corner, for people who don't know, it's a 150-year-old tradition of people debating in public, and it's largely now overtaken by Muslims, which is just natural because it's people, they don't take their atheism seriously enough to debate it, and only Muslims are really serious about their religion, so that's going to inevitably happen. There are a lot of extremist mobs, let's say, over there, and they kind of really hate me when I'm there, and really spiteful. So yeah, they, that there are those people, definitely. A lot of nasty people who want to, especially if they're really young and they just like to cheer on their team and be rude about other people, and they haven't got much else to do with their lives. And you do get sort of extremists in that kind of space, you know. So yeah, there are people who by okay, this is the way I put it. If you treat religion like a football team rather than a way of life, yes, you're not going to benefit from religion, because religion is a way of life to improve yourself. But if it's to I'm better than you kind of stuff, and a lot of Speakers Corner is, because it's all recorded on YouTube and it's all about you winning versus the other person losing, so your ego develops, your ego's hinged or tied to winning the debate, then you're essentially treating your religion as a football team, and those people have no idea about religion. They are, you can look at my recordings, they completely lose. I've talked to some of the most famous people literally running away. One of the probably the most famous debater or something in terms of views and YouTubers, like Ali Dawa, right? Literally running away from me in terms of debate, because they're not that smart. So yeah, I've seen the bad side of religion, and when you misuse religion, you don't follow the religion, you just use it as your I don't know, like a football team.
Now, let me. Now, your experience of Speaker's Corner, were you alluding to being bullied by more extreme Muslims than yourself?
Oh yeah, people wanted me dead and stuff like that. Yeah.
And what did you learn from that experience?
What did I learn? um I learned to be nice to people, like I'll be welcomed by certain people. Here comes a disbeliever, and be really rude. But then eventually they'll start liking me and say, I like you, even though you're a disbeliever and stuff like that. Because I would just laugh. Um, I never hate them. People started liking me because of that. Stuff like that. And there were people who those are people, like, if you regularly come across people and they're open to even talking to you, they'll be positively affected, I think, right? It's the people who literally run away. It's just like I would start debating people who would really hate me, right? Say stuff like, you should be dead. I say, okay, let's put you on camera, and they'll run. So they don't never develop. That's what I was saying. Like people like you, where you actually engage in conversation, your face stays on camera, you actually grow. So yeah, there are people who don't learn, and some people who do learn.
So, what are examples of some majority Muslim countries that you think are worthy of admiration?
I would say most Muslim countries have that. So Jordan, for example, where I am, um, really strong family values. People are way more confident here as well. The women are even more confident just because they're more grounded. When I say more confident, like I'm on a bus and some girls might just turn up and say, "Oh, can we have that seat? We want to sit next to each other because they don't want to sit next to a man," and stuff like that. And we're like, "Yeah, I'm getting off. I'll move and sit in the seat behind," and stuff like that. People are really more just happier, more relaxed with each other. I go to the shop, stuff like that, and people, because of um the religious binding that treats everybody as like brother and sister, you just feel more connected. So yeah, I would say most Muslim countries you feel way more connected, far more happier. And then you might be like, oh, do you agree with people chopping people's hands off? And so yeah, I totally agree with that. If they keep being caught lots of times, and they're not let's say they're not doing it because they're trying to stay alive. Like the state, according to Islam, owes all people in the state at least the basics of food, shelter, water, and some other things according to the Quran, right? So, and basically the result is there's no crime. You go out at nighttime, midnight, with your grandmother in the parks. The parks are full at midnight, especially when it's hotter, and people are enjoying each other, each other's time without screens. And it's beautiful. It's just wonderful to see all these families. So I'll say most Muslim countries have that. You don't really see that as the main focal point unless you watch uh, travel videos. So, do you know there's a really famous travel video guy, Drew Binsky? He's a Jewish guy.
No, I don't know.
Well, he says his favorite countries in the world, and most social countries, friendly countries, are Muslim countries, and he records that and he describes that, right? So I'd say most Muslim countries are like that, and they might have strict laws. Like you can't say anything about the Jordanian king; you'd probably be thrown in prison, right? I love that because I think in England we complain too much about the government this and government that, and you don't realize we voted for the government. Fix yourself, make a community, and sort that out. So I love that you can't complain. You just sort yourself out. I love that.
What about people who choose to leave Islam and convert to another religion? Do you believe that they're worthy of execution?
No, because that's against the teachings of Islam. So maybe I should copy paste that. There's no compulsion in religion. Have you ever heard of that one?
Yes.
So you know that loads of people who are remotely educated about Islam know that no compulsion in religion. Just quickly putting that up for everybody's benefit. So did you? I put the last quote in the chat. Did you manage to copy paste that in the live comments or something?
No, you need to go to my
It's,
YouTube. So go to Luca's
oh,
Back
I need
YouTube.
to.
Yeah, go to YouTube/Luca's Back. That's my channel, and you'll be able to find this live stream, and you'll be able to cut and paste.
Oh yeah, I
But
don't want to do that because then I'll get feedback. I'll hear it twice, won't I?
no, you just click off the sound. So you can
Oh, okay.
open
Well, I'll
up
do that as soon as
if
I'm
you
off.
want.
I think you want me to come off anyway, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah,
You're about to say.
we'll move on soon. So I'll
No,
have you
appreciate your
back
time.
another time. Any final words for today, Khalid?
Do check out my channel. Just search my name, Khalid Safir. We talk about all the stuff we've been talking about right now, mainly focusing on marriage, getting people married, because to get married, you need to solve all the other problems in your life, including does God exist and all these fundamental issues that people don't realize are fundamental. So thank you very much, Luke,
Yes,
for your
Khalid,
time.
great to talk to you. All right, let me pull up
Right. Peace.
something else. Take care, man. I'll talk to you
You too.
later. Okay, let's play something from the New York Times podcast, Untangling the Mess of the Campus Protests.
You mean broken only by a rasp? I mean, I guess my general view of this situation is that it's sort of an extension of the problem that universities have been struggling with ever since the Hamas massacres in Israel and the war in Gaza began. There is this long tradition of left-wing student protest at most elite American universities, Columbia very much included, that over the course of the last 50 or 60 years has been sort of burnished and romanticized as a kind of essential aspect of what it means to be a politically engaged college student. So you have that view joined with the sense that I think really built up in the last 5 years on universities that when people are protesting in the name of anti-racism, anti-colonialism, a lot of the ideas that inform protesters against Israel's war in Gaza, they're sort of assumed to be right and have a lot of moral authority.
Okay, is this Ross Douthat or Carlos Lozada? I think this is Ross Douthat, a right-of-center New York Times columnist.
And I think that universities sort of carried that assumption, for instance, throughout the George Floyd protests, that whatever rules might be broken, students were basically in the right. But in this case, Israel and Gaza, the universities themselves are just deeply divided. And so schools are stuck, in a way, having, on the one hand, this idea of protest in general and left-wing protest.
Yeah, I don't think schools should be stuck any more than a workplace. As soon as you're disrupting the primary business of a university, which is either education or research, depending on the type of university, as soon as you break the first window, as soon as you interfere with the ability of students to get an education or for professors to conduct your research, that's when I believe you should bring in the police. So I don't think it is nearly as difficult and as complicated as Ross Douthat seems to make it.
Protest in particular as something that has to be given a certain degree of deference, but also having this particular issue create unusual divisions on campus where lots and lots of people who would have deferred to a different kind of left-wing protest don't want to defer because they think the pro-Palestinian protesters, whether or not they're anti-Semitic, are just wrong. So it's a mess.
Definitely it's a mess. But then there's also...
Yeah, it's a mess. Now, I'm afraid to play Victor Davis Hanson. I'm afraid he's going to radicalize you.
Mostly a dash studies, gender, Africana studies, this stuff. And so a lot of the frustration is a lot of these students that are so angry at the university, they were let in and they were wholly unprepared and they have made so many demands.
Right. So many people are unprepared that an individual or an institution's real values differ from their stated values. But aside from a box score, right, aside from a sporting result, aside from some clearly definitive result, all right, you can't take almost anything else at face value. And you certainly can't take what individuals or institutions say for themselves their values as being truly their values.
That the university accommodate them rather than they accommodate to the university, that this protest is an extension of the idea that these universities now are in control of DEI students who are the majority and demand that the university renounce its so-called white standards or its white preeminence and become more, I don't know what the word is, woke, DEI, etc. And so there's a lot of frustration on the part of the students that they're in places where they can't do the work, and so they're trying to change the nature of the work.
You mentioned that there are many people from the Middle East coming in on student visas across America. And I know that in recent years in Western Europe, this issue of Muslims with obsessions over Middle Eastern conflicts and ethnic conflicts between Jews and Palestinians.
So I'm looking at the Wall Street Journal right now. Drunk driving arrests are up. Why a DUI arrest down? Because our elites, driven by the mainstream media and driven by those who occupy the high ground of our culture and our political system, said that enforcing the law is racist, right? That was a reaction to the death of George Floyd. That was a reaction to the massive Black Lives Matter riots of 2020. So police have backed off law enforcement. As a result, drunk driving deaths are way up and DUI arrests are way down. So we have stepped away from enforcing the law, and those communities that are most prone to breaking the law are essentially encouraged by the retraction of law enforcement to do more law breaking, which is creating a massive increase in the number of murders, in the number of pedestrian deaths, and because of reckless driving, the number of vehicular deaths, right? The number of drunk driving deaths way up because our elites essentially decided, driven by the elite media such as the New York Times, that enforcing the law is racist. And as a result, right, we have increased chaos in this country compared to the first 3.5 years of the Trump administration.
Has been dominating the political scene in much of Western Europe. Whether you look at various different election results, even in the UK, there was an election recently where the issue of Gaza was more important than any other domestic issue. So do you feel that this importation of Middle Eastern ethnic conflicts is spreading from Western Europe to the United States as you import many, many more Muslims on these student visas and so on?
Yeah, what's happening here, hand in glove, is this administration.
Okay, there was a good challenge to my point about the large number of men essentially living in caves, and all their interests and concerns in life have boiled down to a forthcoming apocalypse, which they may see in either religious terms or racial terms or national terms. And Scott responds to my video clip on this, says, "I'm one of those men in the caves that you speak of. There is truth in what you're saying. I find peace in waiting for civilization to collapse, and I reduce my vulnerability in my mind to the insanity of other people who I know are stupid, crazy, boring, and in some way dangerous to me. I find peace in spending time alone and in nature, and I enjoy learning survival skills and imagining how they would be useful in a disaster. What I don't understand is why people like you who are smart and wise see no good in what I'm doing. I do see some good things in what you're doing. You seem contemptuous towards us. I don't want to come across as contemptuous. I don't want to be contemptuous. I would like to think that I primarily feel some sadness and that I have a belief that there is a better way of living." Back to Scott's comments. Civilizations do collapse. True. And this one will too someday. True. Maybe it won't be in my lifetime, but the kind of people who survive will be people like me and not people like you. I suspect it'll happen sooner rather than later. Just look at the birth rates and decline in intelligence and competence. Advanced civilizations can't continue forever under these conditions. I don't care if I convince you, but I've never heard a good argument for refusing to learn basic survival skills and stocking up on food, medicine, and fuel. I support learning basic survival skills. I think it's a good idea to moderately stock up on food, medicine, and fuel. But there's something even more important, and that is to stock up on your relations with other people, particularly relations with your family, your extended family, your neighbors, the people who live on your street. Lucy Jones, one of the leading earthquake experts, she's at the California Institute of Technology. She said that the best way to survive an earthquake is to have good relations with your neighbors, right? To have some kind of connection with your neighbors. So whether it's inflation, war, natural disaster, political disaster, the best way that you can increase your survival skills is to bond with other people, right? Because different people will have different gifts, and you can leverage your individual gifts on behalf of people you love. So it's terrific if you learn survival skills. It's terrific if you stock up on food, medicine, and fuel. And what's best about that is if you can then harness these skills and these supplies on behalf of people you love. If there aren't people you love, then these skills won't fill you up nearly as much, right? If something has meaning and importance and fascination to you, it will be increased in intensity dramatically the more intensely you love other people, and the more you can share with them things that you are fascinated by and things that you're committed to. The more you can contribute to the lives of other people, right? The happier, more effective, the more affluent you will be, and the better situated you will be to survive the apocalypse.
As in the case of the Obama administration, feels that its progressive radical agenda does not win 51% of the constituency, such as it is. So if you destroy the border, and Obama let in 6 million, we're having 10 million people come across, then you have an instant group of people that are told they have complaints against their host as non-white, impoverished, and they're going to grow government, they're going to grow services, they're going to recalibrate the census, not on the basis of the number of citizens, but the actual bodies or resident population. And they feel that they're going to be part of the left-wing constituency. And so that's an action. Then you have the universities where we have declining fertility rates, declining number of students, and enormous post-George Floyd administrative costs. At Stanford, there's one staffer for all 15,000 students, 15,000 staffers. And so what's happening is they look for people who have the money to pay and do not need student loans or fellowships. And those are mostly people from the Middle East with oil money or China. And so hand in glove, we're bringing in all of these students. The university wants their money, and the political people in Washington want their vote or their body or their ideology. And so they're running the show now in these universities, at least some of them. And the public is against this. All of the polls show that despite all the propaganda, the majority of Americans, well over 70%, lean much more heavily toward Israel than they do Hamas. And if we had a Republican president and a Republican Senate and House, this would not be going on probably. They would call the presidents in and they would say, you know what, it's time that your multi-billion dollar endowments, the income should be taxed, as we're not going to subsidize this, or we're going to get out of the student loan business with $2 trillion, et cetera, et cetera. But this administration is on the side of the protesters and on the side of what they're protesting for.
Do you think that the display of so many Palestinian flags is partly explained by the lack of patriotism, and I mean American patriotism, among young people today? I know if you look at opinion polls, younger generations in America are very much less patriotic than the older generations, than their parents and their grandparents. But they seem to be obsessed with Gaza, obsessed with supporting Palestine. As I said, they're waving that flag. It seems like almost like a nationalist movement.
It is. I would say that since October 7th, I have been asked or confronted.
So during the age of religion, obviously religion was the most important factor motivating people. After the Enlightenment, something else became the primary factor motivating people, and that is national identity, which is a nice term, which is really a euphemism for a racial identity with a cultural component.
I should say, walking across the Stanford campus at least 10 times with people yelling slogans. And when I have asked them what river, what sea, they don't have any idea. These are the non-Middle Eastern students, but they feel that they put their finger in the air and they feel that the popular culture or the majority of the faculty or the majority of the radical students are kind of cool. So then they make the necessary.
Well, one of the important things I learned in therapy was to deal with conflicts when they are at a relatively low level of intensity. So college administrators should have dealt with illegal behavior when it was at a relatively low level of intensity. All right, tackle protests when they break the first window, when they start disrupting normal functioning of your institution. It's so much easier to deal with conflicts, whether between individuals or between an institution and groups, if you operate at a 1 out of 10 level, 2 out of 10 level of intensity, compared to a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10 level of intensity. Very hard to solve conflicts between individuals and groups when the intensity level is high. So I believe the college president should have acted quickly once behavior verged into the lawless.
Necessary adjustments, but they have no idea about what the issues are involved. But the most active faculty and the most active students are running the show. We got to remember, though, that 55% now of Americans are going to trade schools, community schools, vocational schools. And the reason that this generation polls so high, its lack of patriotism, 65%, is because of these campuses where it's about 90 to 10. But if you look at the entire cohort of 18 to 25-year-olds, the reason it's only maybe 60% is because the working classes are still very patriotic. And at least until recently, there's reasons to be a little worried, and that
So our elite officer corps in the United States military has overwhelmingly come from the South. So in general, it strikes me as Southerners are more patriotic than non-Southerners in the United States. And one manifestation of that is that they are more likely to join the armed forces. But as the armed forces become more politically correct, that reduces their incentives to put their body on the line for their country.
The military is 40,000 recruits short, and we know, and they do not like to talk about it, but the reason it's 40,000% is almost entirely from the white male working class, and they are tired of woke. They're tired of being insulted. They're tired of dying at double their numbers of the demographic and then be called racist. These were the people who fought in Afghanistan and Iraq, and they're not signing up, their families, but they're highly patriotic. These are the people, the 8,500 that were removed from the military for not having the 2 mRNA shots, even though many of them, or most of them, had COVID with natural immunity.
Do you think that there is a spreading?
So I'm a big fan of vaccination, but I'm not a big fan of mandates. And so you take something which, to my mind, is good. all right, encouraging people to get vaccinated. But once you make it a mandate, then you encourage opposition. You create incentives for people to rebel. You crush the spirit of people, right? You don't want low morale in the armed forces. You don't want low morale at your educational institution. You don't want low morale at work. And when you take good things but make them mandates, you crush morale. Big mistake.
Anti-white movement in America. And where is this coming from? Is it the DEI ideology that has caused this?
Well, there's two things going on in America, and that is the number of interracial and interethnic marriages is at an all-time high. In other words, about half of all Asians marry someone that's not Asian, and about 40% of Latinos marry someone that's not Latino, and about 15 to 20% blacks do the same. The difference is, though, the offspring of those marriages and the people involved in those marriages have radically changed their affiliation on census and admissions and have now identified themselves as non-white. And they do that for careerist reasons. Just as in the Jim Crow South, if somebody was 1/4 black and they could pass for white, they said they were white. Now, if you're 1/4 black, you try to pass for black because it gives you enormous career advantages. And so that's what's happening. So it's hard to tell.
So the way Steve Saylor sums this up is that the flight from white is massively incentivized.
One of the things they keep saying is that the population is now 66% white. But if you would go back to the number of people in those non-white communities who just 10 years ago identified as white and corrected for increased population growth, you would see that it's probably about 75% white. So it's hard to know, but I guess what I'm saying is they have established under Obama, and it's been emphasized under Biden.
Right. When you put people's backs against the wall, whether the people are Jews, Palestinians, blacks, gays, Christian Americans, right? You put people's backs against the wall and say that you're disappearing, you're losing influence and power, that you're being demographically overwhelmed, you're going to spark an extreme and unnecessarily intense resistance, which is highly likely to be illegal. You are going to remove the normal constraints that keep people on the straight and narrow, right? Once you say that the election is rigged, right, you are removing all moral constraints from people. When you say that a people's demographic group is being overwhelmed by outgroups, again, you're going to remove moral constraints from people, and you're going to incentivize what the elites call stochastic terrorism, where you just get these random terrorist attacks that can't be predicted, but they're massively incentivized because you're telling people who are often unstable that their group is losing power and influence.
Biden, that it is okay to say things about whites and do things about whites that would not be applicable to any other group. In other words, you can openly say that whites as a collective are neurotic, or they're hung up on standards, or they're workaholics.
So here is a more formal definition of stochastic terrorism. Refers to a method of mathematically predicting overall risk of a terrorist attack by using various indicators such as insightful speech by pundits, politicians, or various leaders. So speech is a really poor predictor of terrorism, right? And of criminal violence and murder. A much better predictor is intensity of interest, right? If people feel intensely that their survival is at risk, that their way of life is under threat, they're going to react by whatever means they regard as most effective. All right, we did not evolve to be gullible. We weren't born yesterday. It's not like we hear some YouTube show, we hear some speech, we catch a clip on Fox News, and then we go out and commit terrorism, right? The people who commit acts of terror, right, are doing so because they see their way of life, their group's survival as at stake. And so whenever there are conditions that will make people feel that their very survival, their way of life is at stake, you're massively increasing the risk of violence. Like, why was there a I presume, Jewish-led counter-protest at UCLA late Tuesday night, early Wednesday morning, right? The most vigorous counter-protest in the nation, because Jewish students for the past week or so had been denied access to basic campus facilities such as Powell Library by this Palestinian encampment. And so you deny people their ability to get their education, to go to class, to use a library, and you don't do anything about it. And the campus just allowed this pro-Palestine encampment that restricted access to basic campus facilities, you are massively incentivizing a violent counterattack, which is exactly what happened.
Or they're all of these neurotic blasphemies, but you would never be able to say anything else stereotypically about any other group. And the answer is, well, when you ask them about that, they say, well, these are historically oppressed groups, so therefore they're not capable of being oppressors. And even if they were inclined to do that, they don't have the so-called power to do that. But I think what we're seeing, though, is a growing rebellion among so-called whites, and it's really suicidal what a lot of these militant minorities are doing, because what they're doing is they are making a collective now, not of right-wing Nazi types, but they were making a collective solidarity of people who are Democrats and Jews and from all over the world who have never identified as white, but they have been identified as white by people on campus, by faculty, and they're starting to create a sense of solidarity, number one. And then when you look at the cities and the states.
So I went to UCLA for a year, and it was intense and amazing experience. I retain great intensity of feeling for UCLA, and so it was fascinating to me to see UCLA dominating the news because of these campus protests. And there was a #1 story on the New York Times a couple of days ago about the UCLA counter-protest against the pro-Palestine encampment.
That are run by so-called DEI people. If you look at the big cities, Washington, Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York, Baltimore, Memphis, they all have black police chiefs, they have people of color that in the city council that run it, and they have black mayors, and yet everybody is leaving. They're suffering enormous flight, not just of so-called white people, but of everybody. And so it's a very strange thing where everybody says DEI, 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 but they don't want to live under a DEI city council or a mayor
James
or state
back
because
on
they
the
feel
show.
they're racist.
Stephen J. James, what's going on, my brother?
Hey, Luke. Thank you for bringing me on. How are you?
I'm excellent. Good to hear from you.
Excellent. Look, what I'd first like to do is just complain about the state of Bluetooth. That's not exactly what I came on for, but I'm having trouble with my Bluetooth headphones.
You
Don't just
sound
hate
fine.
Bluetooth. Don't
Sound
just
fine,
hate
bro.
it, though, Luke. How many times do you also have a problem with... I think I'm speaking to the audience here. Bluetooth sucks, doesn't it? We actually need... Forget AI, we need an improvement in Bluetooth technology. But anyway...
We need a spiritual transformation so Bluetooth doesn't bother us as intensely.
It's a bother, isn't it? Who can get a set of Bluetooth headphones just to connect when you want them to? Anyway, my goodness. Look, whilst you were talking about this issue on the college campuses and that, I just had one thought that came into my mind, and it was that whilst you're doing this like fair dinkum show about all this and trying to do it, you know, about a fair show about each side and different people have different gifts and here's a bit of Victor David Hanson and all this, don't you just wish that like we could go back to 2018 and Brundlefly could storm in here and say like, but why do we have to put up with all this bullshit anyway in our own country? Why are these groups why are having these inter-ethnic fights in our country? Why do we have to put up with it?
Yeah, you think I'd be happier having like 1,000 live viewers right now, like the glory days, and having rambunctious discussions like we used to have in the glory days of internet blood sports? Yeah, I do miss it.
Yeah. So I watched some of your live stream when you went to the protest, which I think, did it turn violent after you were there? Right?
Yeah, there. I mean, but violence is probably an overstatement. There was a little bit of violence. I mean, there's a little bit of violence in a normal act of sex. So,
well, okay, yeah, okay.
Right, it's penetration, right? And so there was some penetration of the pro-Palestine and pro-Jewish sides.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, how much violence goes on when you engage in the act of love?
Well, let's keep this on topic, I think. Yeah, for legal reasons too, of course.
Yes.
Let's
disavow.
So for during that live stream then, what I was struck by is Obviously, you're on the Jewish side, but you did venture over to the Palestinian side. And what was your take on those people?
My take was that the conduct on both sides was either even, or my side was. There was reason to believe that my side might have even behaved worse.
You think both sides were trying to provoke each other? Is that was? Yeah.
There was some of that, but I was biased. I expected that the pro-Palestine crowd would just be awful, and my side would be virtuous. But that was not the reality of what happened. So I think because the pro-Palestine crowd had dominated the news for the previous 10 days, that many people on the pro-Israel side came with a substantial chip on their shoulder and really wanted to get into it with the pro-Palestine crowd.
Yeah. Yeah, I was struck by how, and there were, well, what am I trying to say? I was struck by this interethnic conflict going on an American university campus. For one thing, it just seemed like bizarre what is going on. And then I realized that is like an island as well in the middle of basically like millions of Mexicans too, isn't it? So
yeah, I didn't see many Latinos nor many Asians participating in the campus protests.
Yeah. And on the Jewish side, there was a great deal of claiming persecution, I think. I heard lots of shrill middle-aged women standing up and crying about the anti-Semitism and won't somebody please think of the children and all this kind of stuff. Do you think that is a good approach to take, or is it just kind of natural?
Well, is it a good approach to take to whip up intense feeling among your in-group while leaving people outside of your in-group unmoved? Yeah, it probably, you can't go wrong telling your in-group that it's victimized. I mean, you can't go wrong in terms of your stock, your standing, your status with your in-group, or the comfort of your life, right? Life is so much easier, so much more pleasant, so much more comfortable when you have good standing with your in-group, and you can never lower your standing by telling your in-group how much it is persecuted and oppressed.
Yeah, you see, I was conflicted. I was thinking, is it a good idea for like these members of the Jewish community? And I think they had somebody from Israel there as well on the stage, some ambassador or whoever it was speaking. I heard an Israeli voice, and he was some official from Israel to speak. I was thinking, is this actually good for the people there at UCLA to whip them into supporting Israel? Now that this might be their natural proclivities, but there is this conflict going on over there. Of course, now we have Palestinian protesters coming out and, arguing for their side. But I was conflicted by what is the claim here going on the Jewish side? Is it that they are in fear of anti-Semitism on the campus, or is it that they need to whip up their own crowd to fervently support Israel? And the two don't seem to necessarily be the same thing. Am I making any sense?
Yes, and this is a disappointing realization that I've come to, Stephen J. James, and that is that there is no in-group identity without an accompanying sense of victimhood. So if your in-group identity is moderate, you're likely to only have a moderate sense of victimhood. But if you have an intense in-group identity, which has many adaptive functions, you're going to have an intense sense of victimhood. You can't have an intense, strong sense of in-group identity without an accompanying strong, intense feeling of victimhood. The two go together, and every single group in the world can think of itself as victims. Now, you want to have smart people running the show who have empathy, who have ability to distance themselves from these feelings of victimhood so that you can steer the group in a more productive direction. But I think most people are better off with a more intense in-group identity. Most people. Some people would be better off with a less intense in-group identity. But wouldn't you say, compared to someone with no sense of in-group identity and someone with, say, a moderate sense of in-group identity, that the people with the moderate sense of in-group identity are better off than the people with no sense of in-group identity.
Sure. Yes, I get it. I'm just thinking of like the welfare, the benefit to the people on the ground in at UCLA, on other college campuses, various Jews in America. I've heard you say in the past that when Israel is at war, you feel it as a Jew walking around,
Yes.
because people are like, yeah, and even to the extent that, haven't you said in the past that, say, that certain rabbis will say, well, maybe it might not be the best idea to go around wearing your yarmulke or something, or try to blend in more, or don't overtly walk around maybe with the Israel flag, tied around your neck, at the very least that. Wouldn't that be a
Right.
more sensible way to approach things, rather than whipping up these people who it's been claimed they're vulnerable, they're under threat, therefore it seemed to be encouraging them to go out and over-identify not just as Jewish, but as Zionist, as Israel, is actively supporting Israel, when they might not actually necessarily, all of them, have been so inclined to do that.
Yeah, that which is sensible and that which is intense is usually opposite. Life is more pleasurable. Life is more fun
Well,
when
that's true, yeah.
things are intense, but intensity will usually diminish your clarity and good sense. But think about, say, the act of love. You can have a particularly intense act of love by, walking the erotic minefield, by following your love map, by, enacting your particular proclivities, and you get to have a highly intense act of love. But if you were to articulate what was going on for you, it wouldn't sound very sensible. So if you were about to go into a fight, being particularly amped up, being in a particularly intense state, will likely serve you as long as you're also able to make good decisions. But yeah, generally, life is better. You have more energy. You are happier when you're living life intensely. The downside to that is you usually make less sensible decisions. And on the other hand, life is usually better when your decisions are more sensible than less sensible. So you've got a dynamic that is going in opposite directions. Like the more passionate you are about anything, the less clearly you will see what's going on, right? The people who are most passionate about their spouse, right, their partner in the act of love, right, that intensity comes at the price of clarity. I know many ostensibly happily married people who believe that their spouse is like the greatest person in the world. When you look at the situation with just common sense, their spouse is not the greatest person in the world, but apparently marriages go better when you have an inflated sense of the greatness of your partner. And there are many untrue beliefs that seem to serve us. So I see a direction here with these type of in-group intense sense of victimhood rallies, that you're going to increase the intensity of people's in-group identity, which will tend to act against the making sensible decisions. But it's not clear, which is more adaptive for people, because most people are better off living a more intense rather than a less intense life. At the same time, people are better off making sensible decisions rather than irrational decisions.
Yeah. No, I get it. I'm also, I'll just say, am I the only one who's suspicious about some of these protests? Could they be organized? Could these protests in a way be being stirred up as like problem, reaction, solution, create a problem to kind of knock them on the head? Has anybody else had any suspicions about any of this, perhaps?
Yeah, they are organized. I mean, there's a uniformity to these protests. There's a pattern to these protests. They set up camps. They make demands. They take over public space. They prevent the normal functioning of a college campus to further their demands and to attract media attention. So it may not necessarily be that this is hierarchically run, but they're all singing from the same hymn book. And generally speaking, if your in-group is singing from the same hymn book, you have higher esprit de corps, you have higher morale, you're going to be more effective in life because, generally speaking, a group strategy is going to win out over an individualist strategy.
Yeah, you used a word there that I don't know what that means. What's that? Esprit de corps?
Esprit de corps means morale. About morale for people it's usually used with regard to the military.
Okay. And so who were the Palestinian protesters then? What group of people? Is it just obviously Muslims, or were there loads of like white liberals?
Yeah, so here I got
too?
a definition of esprit de corps. It's esprit de corps is a feeling of loyalty and pride that is shared by the members of a group who consider themselves to be different from other people in some special way. So synonyms are solidarity, rapport, team spirit, and camaraderie. So who were the pro-Palestine protesters? So they are certainly younger than the pro-Israel crowd on average. They are swarthier on average. They seem to be largely Arabs, Muslims, people from the Middle East, but there are some Jews in their midst who don't agree with Zionism or don't agree with the current manifestation of Zionism in the state of Israel. And there are some white people also on their side, but it does look to be dominantly a Middle East group.
I was not suspicious. I want to completely disagree with something Khalid was saying. It was way earlier on in the show. Where he was saying
Khalid,
that,
my friend, Khalid.
Khalid, yes, or whatever. Yes. Anyway, what he was saying was, I had it on your Twitter. You were something about that these are. It's not necessarily right or left. What was he saying? What was he saying?
Yes, I will give you the exact quote that it's not Muslims
Sorry,
are not
actually,
right. There's not a left-right divide when it comes to Palestine, as Muslims are a large percentage of those protesters, and Muslims are right-wing, according to being family-oriented. So I don't believe that Muslims in the United States
It's
or the
just
United
bollocks,
Kingdom,
isn't it?
I don't
Exactly.
believe in pragmatic political exact terms that is correct. I believe that Muslims predominantly in the West vote for the parties of the center left and left.
Yes,
But
it's
they
just
are
absolute
opposed to gay
bollocks.
marriage and trans stuff.
But not on a political level. They are not politically active on the right wing whatsoever. Not in our countries. In their own countries, they are. But they get over here, and almost exclusively, they are left-wing agitators. And so, I don't know how to square that circle, Luke, as to what to think about that. Now, I'm sure what you'll probably want to tell me is that they're just being smart people advocating for their own best interests, and it's in their best interest when they get over here to agitate for the left wing, which affords them immigrant rights and that. But how would somebody like Khalid, therefore tell me though that these are a right wing people? It just doesn't make any sense to me.
Right, probably because he has some sympathies with he has considerable sympathies for what are considered
Has his
traditional
blinders on.
values, and Khalid is not normally talking in the terms that, say, academics would talk. He talks in terms of apologetics, of making a case for. So rather than precisely describing reality, he articulates a presentation of reality that is more alignment with how he would like to see the world as opposed to how the world actually is. That's my understanding of Khalid's rhetoric.
This is the problem I have with specific Muslims. Not all Muslims, because I live in the UK and that might be hate speech. But don't you feel that when you're talking to a Muslim, 9 times out of 10, it feels like you're talking to somebody who has a party political affiliation, and they have to walk the party line?
Yes. Yes, there doesn't seem to be nearly as
It's
much
so frustrating, isn't
diversity.
it? So
Yeah.
frustrating.
Yeah. In fact, I know many rabbis who have given up on dialogue with Muslims, rabbis who are overall quite predisposed to interreligious dialogue, but they've given up on dialogue with Muslims because it always comes down to Muslims just handing out proof texts saying, there must be no compulsion in the matter of religion, etc. That there is the same sort of rhetoric that Khalid gave.
And there's so many excuses which come down to like textual cope or like textual like legal getting out clauses and things which they use. Like it's quite clear that the history of Islam is what has been one of conquest, certainly from the early days. So like I just, for instance, threw out a quote because Khalid was saying, what a wonderful, peaceful, benign force Islam has been, and never done anybody any wrong, didn't do nothing. And so from my understanding, I'd heard somebody talking about this a while ago about how Muhammad himself expelled pretty much the entire Arabian Peninsula who refused to convert. And so you can quite quickly like look this up, get a quote, and see that in many sources, I mean, the story is widely told about this happening. And so you can get a quote of something Muhammad said. For instance, I will certainly expel Jews and Christians from the peninsula until I leave none but Muslims. And Khalid will come back and say, you really shouldn't just trust any old sources and stick to the Quran and things like this. And it just seems like such political weaselness. Why can't you just stand up for it, Luke?
There is no non-fundamentalist Islam, right? There is no Islamic denomination that does not hold that God gave the Quran, that every word of the Quran comes from God. So you have extensive secular critical study of the Jewish Bible, the Christian Bible, and you have extensive study of the Quran, looking at it as a human document. But there are no denominations with Islam that aren't fundamentalists, that don't use as their foundation that every single word of the Quran came from God. So that makes this kind of dialogue much more difficult. And if people are interested, there's a scholar by the name of Aaron W. Hughes, a scholar of both Judaism and Islam, and he wrote a terrific book called Theorizing Islam. And he notes, this was one paragraph here: when one permits those whom one studies to define the terms in which they will be understood, suspends one's interest in the temporal and the contingent, or fails to distinguish between truth claims and regimes of truth, one has ceased to function as a historian or scholar. So you then have a variety of roles available to you. You can be perfectly respectable as a friend or advocate. You can be a cheerleader, a voyeur, a retailer of import goods. None, however, should be confused with scholarship. So scholars of religion have largely tended to look upon their departmental colleagues who specialize in Islam with bewilderment and bemusement, because those who are supposedly scholars of Islam in Western universities are overwhelmingly apologists for Islam as opposed to scholars.
Yeah. And the other thing that you always hear is the moment that you try to contradict anything that you say, you try to use their own books against them, or their own sayings not against them, but you try to say, well, what about this one? What about this one? Well, that inevitably comes back at you. Well, you don't even speak Arabic, so shut up. You can't even say anything. And even somebody like Khalid can't speak Arabic himself. Even he is relying upon translations, and will probably be like we saw earlier. He admitted he gets bullied by the bigger Muslims, I guess. The Arabic-speaking Muslims who think that they are more devout, more true, who have the closer connection to truth than he does. But yeah, I always feel like I'm talking to a party political member when I'm speaking to a Muslim, and it's so frustrating. So frustrating.
Right. That's why many people have just given up on trying to have dialogue with Muslims, because they're that frustration that you just articulate. I mean, how are you going to talk about things with someone who takes it as a foundational principle that every word of their religious document comes from God? I mean, how do you argue against God or critique God? It's verges on the impossible.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, moving on. So, I had a few notes here that I was going to talk to you about. So we'll move on from that then. The other thing, I heard, these are totally disparate topics, Luke, but I did hear Elliot Blatt on your show. It was great to hear Elliot Blatt come on the other day again, of course, reporting from San Francisco. But one of the things he did say was his consternation with the fact that the United States and Western governments continue to fund the war in Ukraine, and he said he could not fathom essentially why it's going on, and he asked you, do you kind of know why? And so I wanted to put across the idea why it might be in Americans' interest. I'm not trying to shill for the Ukrainians or anything like that. It often comes across like this, but somebody explained to me that the reason why, if it is at all in Americans' interest to fund this war in the Ukraine, which is something like, I don't know, 1 or 2% of American military spending per year, then the reason is not so much that it is absolutely necessary that the Ukrainians win the local conflict, but it is more about this grander scale of geopolitics, which would, like the old world order, would fall apart if the Russians were allowed to roll over Ukraine how they wanted to, without being stopped, and this would like bring down the old order and signal more worse to China that they could therefore just roll into Taiwan unopposed. And so it is more about preventing like the Third World War and saving this old order. I'm doing this terrible job of explaining it.
No, I get it completely. You can sum it up in 3 words: rule-based order.
Yes, this is it. So yes, you could maybe articulate what I've just said even better to Elliot, I suppose.
That the nations supporting Ukraine say we need a rule-based international order. And if we allow Russia or any nation to get away with swallowing a substantial portion of another nation, we are endangering the rule-based order, and we are creating incentives for more nations to go ahead and swallow other nations if they feel like they can get away with it. So we have to engage in the equivalent of broken window policing. We have to stop this right at the beginning so that other nations are not encouraged to go out and swallow their neighbors.
And this makes absolute sense to me. When somebody explained this to me, I understand it. And I even understand that horrible quote, which when I heard come out of Lindsey Graham's mouth, it disgusted me, Luke. When I heard Lindsey Graham say, he heard somebody said, like, thousands of Russians are dying or something. And Lindsey Graham said, it's the cheapest money we've ever spent. And
so
something like that. And I thought that was disgusting, I thought, but now I get it.
Right, because, I mean, that's a different argument than for the rules. There's a different component to that argument. You're arguing then that dollar for dollar, this is a cheap and efficient way of degrading one of America's biggest geostrategic rivals. That for every $1 billion we send to Ukraine,
or of maintaining that rules-based order,
right? Not just maintaining the rules-based order. This is a different argument. This is degrading a rival. We are bleeding the rival. It's like funding the North Vietnamese so that they can kick American ass, or funding those opposed to the American occupation of Afghanistan and Iraq. So you are funding those who are weakening your enemy without suffering any loss of life on your side. It's kind of like America sitting out the bloodiest portions of World War One and World War Two, and then sweeping in at the end to gain the biggest advantage at the lowest price.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. So when it sounds disgusting on the face of it when somebody says something like that. And it even brings into perspective that evil quote. Wow, I sound like an absolute fucking neocon here, but it even brings into perspective when you think about like what the evil bitch, I suppose, Madeleine Albright was actually thinking when she said, like, yes, it was worth a million Iraqi children or something. I can actually understand the mindset of what they were actually getting at now. Whereas before, I was completely polarized against it. I couldn't understand it. I thought, how could anybody say something so, wicked? But,
Well, people have incentives, and these incentives don't always align with what sounds morally palatable or what even sounds morally acceptable. But if the facts on the ground are that it's in your interest if something horrible happens to someone else, that's still a fact on the ground. Generally speaking, people and nations do conduct themselves in alliance with their own best interests, even if it sounds immoral. They then just use their cognitive resources to try to reframe what is horrible as really the moral upstanding thing.
Yeah. So, that's the reason that I am convinced that if an American wants an answer as to why 1 or 2% of the American military budget is being spent upon this conflict in the Ukraine, it is to keep in place, whatever you might think of it, this status quo that has kept the world in relative peace, kind of, since the Second World War, with America as the policeman of the world. Nobody else can do it. Nobody else can do it. You might oppose it. You might think that, being a neocon and neoconservatism and American, whatever the word is, extensionism around the world is a terrible thing, and many people do, but it is a status quo that has persisted for some time. And I certainly, and certainly many the people who are deciding to go in and support Ukraine, I think are quite rightly terrified of what comes after that system falling apart, that system crumbling apart, where like China becomes ascendant, realizes that America isn't going to be this policeman in the world, and Russia realizes that, and this is a much less, this is a much more terrifying future than if we just, pile hundreds of billions of dollars into Ukraine and make sure everybody in the world realizes that no, things actually are going to be enforced as they have been for the last few decades.
Now, there's still, I do see some legitimacy to those arguments. I would disagree with them because I believe the price that we are paying, the disaster that will come from this unnecessary conflict with Russia will outweigh the benefits. So that's where I stand.
Fair income. So moving on then, I have one more thing I wanted to talk about. And that is, I know that you have been a long Bitcoin disrespecter, haven't you, Luke?
Yes.
Yes. Well, I once told you a story about how I was a Bitcoin kid, basically. So if anybody doesn't know, back in the day, I used to play with these Bitcoins as if they were just like tokens they were like some gambling games on the internet. I was very young. I came across this. I think I initially got some, like, something like, I don't know, 25 English pounds or something. And I bought some with, like, one of my parents' credit cards or something, consensually. And then I used to use them as, like, tokens on there were games on the internet you could play. It was effectively gambling, but because I was too young to gamble at the time, this enabled this to happen. It wasn't really money at the time; they were just like tokens in a game. And this is now like over a decade ago. And I probably, through my hands at some point, probably went, I'm not joking, thousands of Bitcoins.
Wow.
Playing with them in these games. And so I have this. And so I have like I have this problem that I had wallets at the time, and I was sure like I had Bitcoin sat around that I could possibly be able to get access to, and I've never been able to do this because they're like, some of them were on websites that have gone defunct, some of them are passwords that just can't be accessed, and so I literally have no idea what could be there and what couldn't. But I actually was able. Sorry, I'm having a problem with my mic. I was able to access a wallet with some in, right? Only a small amount. It was like a few $1,000s, but it was there, right? I've finally managed to find some of this, what now in today's world is actually money, and wow, it's worth a few $1,000s, under $5,000. So I went to the trouble of attempting to then turn this into real money. And this process is an absolute nightmare. It's almost impossible. So first you have to send it to an exchange. You have to register at an exchange. This takes an enormous amount of time because these things are registered now. They're under regulation. You have to send in multiple forms of identity, passport, driving license, utility bills. You have to video yourself on your mobile phone and look left and look right and up and down and all these kinds of identity procedures. And then you get to sell your Bitcoins, less than a Bitcoin, but on the exchange, get your few $1,000s, and you're like, aha! Finally, I've solved this riddle and finally got an access to a little bit of money, about $4,000, and then click the withdraw button, and then wait. It says okay, pending, and then like the next day, you get a notice from this exchange saying you now need to prove the source of this wealth. And like, well, it was over a decade ago. I've no idea where I got these. I can't prove, it was a decade ago. How am I supposed to prove how I got these coins? And something known as know your customer rules mean that unless you can prove exactly how you acquired these coins, then they're not going to fucking give me the money. So
did you research? Did you Google the problem and see how other people had surmounted it?
Yeah. And well, currently it's pending, and it's been pending for 6 weeks that this money is sat there on this exchange due to its money laundering compliance and it's called KYC rules, know your customer rules, where exchanges, certainly for the UK, are required. You have to prove the source of the wealth in order for them to release the money to you, to know that you are basically not a money launderer or a terrorist. And so they've asked, like, it's gone back and forth now about 5 times with saying we need more information from you. We need, asking me more and more questions, and now it's just sat there in limbo, and I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to extract it. So the reason I'm telling you this, Luke, anyway, this long story, is I just thought it would be useful for people to hear.
Yeah,
this really is a fucking scam.
Yeah,
It really is.
Yeah,
It's an absolute nightmare.
I suspect that it's easier to get funds in the United States, or at least it used to be easier to get Bitcoin funds. I'm not particularly up on this area. It's just that from my limited amount of reading on this topic, I just didn't see where Bitcoin met legitimate needs more effectively than other alternatives. And so the kind of nightmare you just described is a large part of why I turned against cybercurrencies once I did a little bit of investigation, I think about 3 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. This could be a peculiarity with like the strict UK financial regulations. I admit this fully, but there was no other way for me to go about it. I wasn't going to use some kind of black market service, and I have nothing to hide. Legitimately, I was a kid about a decade ago playing with these things. I managed to access a wallet. There's about $4,000 there. I'm just trying to turn it into real money. So I've gone down the right, I've done it the right way. We'll see if I get it, but it also made me realize as well, another thing that people don't realize with these cryptos is the danger of losing it. And certainly for somebody like me with ADHD, like these things are not backed by any kind of insurance or anything like that. If you have to entirely trust that in a few years' time, if you put all your money into something like a crypto, into a Bitcoin, and you take excessive measures to like protect it, you have to rely upon like that in 5 years' time, you will be able to access it all, and that all the steps that you've gone through to like secure it won't lock you out of it in like 5 years' time. And it's not insured, it's not protected in any way. You can't get it back if somebody steals it, or you can't ask somebody to unlock it for you if you forgot your password, or it just doesn't work, or the website's gone when you come back to it, or any of this stuff. So it's an incredibly risky thing.
Yeah, it's why I'm against big cybercurrencies. But I think more importantly for you, I'm going to go out on a limb and say this lack of keeping track of your financial resources, including your Bitcoins, your lack of organization and paperwork is not just something that is reflected in this latest Bitcoin difficulty, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that this one symptom in this one isolated part of your life pervades your life and has consistently held you back from moving ahead in life, as opposed to someone who's able to sustain attention to detail.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure absolutely that plays a lot into it. I do wonder with the Bitcoin thing specifically, though, if I hadn't have had ADHD. I mean, at the time I couldn't I couldn't have known that it would become worth literally $70,000 per coin when I was like using, I know, 20 of them per time to play a game with.
But there were people who believed that and who took the time to make the notes that they would need to be able to cash out in case Bitcoin skyrocketed. And those people aren't just more successful in this one narrow transaction. These are people who are much more successful in life overall. This is like our problems are never just our problems. They're just symptoms of much deeper problem, like an inability to display adequate consideration for ourselves, let alone other people. And Elliot Platts, go ahead.
Sorry, not just that. If only, Luke, you know as well as I do that ADHD is about. I'm sure everybody's sick of us blaming everything on ADHD by now. By the way,
who cares? We will speak the truth, even if it's unpopular. Here I stand.
Exactly. Yes. But you and I both know. I'm sure that deadlines matter, and normal people can abide by like deadlines and getting things done in the right, like in a timely manner. But if you're ADHD and you can like avoid something, then you can just let that slide and just leave it there. And if only I'd have bothered to think about this, Luke, when I knew that Bitcoin was like worth $1,000, which was sometime like around, I don't know what, about 8 years ago. If only I'd have like got my head out of my arse and thought about this back then it would have been much, much easier to probably find some of it. Who knows? I could be sat on like $1 million or something now.
Yeah.
Instead.
Exactly. Your lack of an adaptive level of consideration for yourself in taking care of these details may well have cost you, let's say it cost you $1 million in this matter, but it also has cost you countless amounts of money and the good things of life. Aside from this is just one manifestation. And so occasionally forgetting things is not a medical disorder, Elliot Blatt says. My point is that occasionally forgetting something is sometimes a symptom of a much deeper problem, and sometimes these deeper problems are most effectively dealt with as a medical disorder. Sometimes they're not most effectively dealt with as a medical disorder. Sometimes occasionally forgetting something has absolutely no meaning. But in my life experience, people who forget things that cost them tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of dollars, this isn't just a one-time thing. This is a persistent problem in life that they don't take a normal level of consideration for their own best interests, let alone other people's best interests.
Yeah, I wouldn't even say that forgetting is part of ADHD. I'm not really forgetful, I don't think. It's knowing that there's something there that needs to be done, that you can do, but you can get away with not doing it. You know, it's not disaster won't befall you if you just leave that thing undone. And then like, whoa, a decade's passed and I haven't done anything about it, and now I'm fucked. You know, now I'm utterly, you know, whoa. I mean, if only I'd realised this like 6 or 7 years ago and like had a go at doing something about it, where maybe like websites were still there, or things could still be accessed, or like the computers that I used weren't working Windows 7 or whatever, and now even if I stick the hard drives in another computer, they just come up error and all this kind of stuff, and you just like realize, wow, I leave things to the very deadline that, like until I know that the consequences are right upon my head, and then I have a look and see if anything could be done about it, and it's often too late.
Yeah, the chat says, we're just crying over spilt milk. Well, sometimes crying over spilt milk is the best way to go, because the more intensely you feel the loss, the more likely you are to do something about this sort of situation going forward. The more blithely you dismiss the loss, the less likely you are to do something about this going forward. Is that fair?
Sure. Look, I'll be absolutely blunt. I'm not crying over the spilt milk of the Bitcoins the Bitcoin millionaire I could maybe be if I only had access to these wallets that I used to play games with as a child. I've come to accept it. I've come to terms with it. In fact, in a way, the ADHD allows me to not actually, beat myself up about it. I can kind of just let it be, in a way that other people would now be furiously searching through all this stuff. There are even people who, they've heard me tell these stories and they've contacted me and said, look, I will help you. Search for this stuff. And I'm like, no, I just need to let it go. And I actually can just let it go, because it's not good for me to search. Yes, I put a bit of effort into it, because suddenly Bitcoin's turned out to be worth like $70,000, and it was the time to try and find out if there was anything worth salvaging there. But
so I'm reading this book, Why We Change and 10 Reasons Why We Don't, and the author Ross Ellenhorn makes the point that the primary reason that we do successfully change is that we have contemplated something, we have come to terms with the price of what we're doing, and we see the benefits of doing something differently, and that this internal directed change is the most effective type of change. And I think that's apropos here. I think we are better off when we try to learn from these mistakes and problems and losses, as opposed to just blithely dismissing them. Doesn't mean that you curl into a ball and don't leave the house for a month. But I think that there is a good adaptive case to be made for intensely feeling the loss, all the dimensions of the loss, and then constructing a more adaptive path forward.
Absolutely, absolutely. Anyway, I wanted to tell that tale because I do imagine that there are so many people who certainly have probably bought into the Bitcoin craze over the last few years, certainly over the last few months. Sadly, when Bitcoin goes to a high, I'm not too blackpilled on it as a concept and stuff. I just think it's terribly risky, and my story really does explain how you could possibly be the holder of it, and you have to think in 5 or 10 years' time I'm coming to realize this wealth. It's not like stocks or money in a bank, which is somewhat secured, and you'll definitely be able to access again. It's an extremely risky thing. It's yeah, I wouldn't do it, and certainly. Well, that's probably enough of the story, to be honest.
Well, what are you
I think
taking
people.
away from this for your own life? Nothing? You're just going to move on? Or is there something to be learned that you want to apply going forward?
So I've come to a few of these realizations, actually. One of the things I used to listen to, this is a bit different, but I used to buy into all this bullshit about taking your privacy really serious on the internet. You hear this everywhere. So I was one of these people who was convinced by these privacy bros that were always telling you Google is spying on you and Apple spies on you, and all this, and this is really serious. So you need to use like VPNs, and you need to turn off the backup on your phone and everything. And so I was one of these people. I thought, this all makes sense. I don't want the companies to spy on me. And this all came crashing down around a year ago when I was running out of work, and I smashed my phone on the ground, and I couldn't get it to. It was just totally destroyed, and I suddenly realized, well, I don't have a backup of literally anything. And so at that point, I realized, no, I have to rely upon the tools that are out there. I actually have to I have to stop believing bullshit that people feed me, that it's for my, that these levers and like things that are put there in society, and these tools that other people rely on and make good use of for reliability, I actually should put my reliance into them. And so from that point on, I've become much more trusting of these things. I look around, bad things aren't happening to other people. My friends' doors aren't being put through by the police because they've said naughty words on the internet, or they've visited like right-wing websites or anything like this. Or I actually can rely upon the normie things that are out there much more than I realized to take care of the things. So now I've turned on like the backup on my phone, and I use Google Photos for all my photos, and I'm not worried about institutions looking at my photos, because at the end of the day, I'm not doing anything wrong. So that is something that I've taken away. I don't know if that answers the question, Luke.
Yeah, no, I think that's powerful, and there are broader applications of this. That not only do you want to be appropriately skeptical, you don't want to be inappropriately skeptical. Right, so normies, we may criticize them for not being skeptical enough about this or that, but sometimes normies are right, and you can have too much skepticism of what a doctor tells you. For example, I was friends with this woman in Orthodox Jewish life who was very much into natural healing. Okay, all well and good, but when she got a bowel cancer diagnosis, right, she didn't follow medical direction. Instead, she tried to heal through natural means, and she was dead shortly thereafter. I suspect that she would have lived more comfortably and longer and more productively if she'd followed medical direction. So I am all for doing research on what doctors tell you, but I'm not for automatically dismissing what doctors tell you because you have these theories about natural healing.
Yeah, I think that was similar actually to Steve Jobs, who
Yes.
He got cancer, and he believed literally that he could cure it by like drinking apple juice or something.
Yes.
It's not a laughing matter, but Even like the smartest, richest people of the world can be fooled into this utter bullshit.
Yeah, I mean, often doctors will give an important diagnosis, such as you have bowel cancer, to someone, and people will be inappropriately skeptical of what the doctor tells them. So, yeah, there's a downside to having no skepticism to what your priest, your doctor, your dentist, or your accountant tells you, but there's also a tremendous downside to being overly skeptical.
Yeah, and on some level, it is best to hand over like your agency for making these decisions to people who have the professional capacity and the years of experience to make these decisions for you, rather than you relying upon like your internet research or what the bros in the chat have recommended.
Yeah, like if you go to a doctor in California for certain consultations, the doctor is legally required to ask you if you have guns in the house. Right? So to me, that's insane and does not belong in a medical consultation. But because the doctor is required to ask you a question which I think is inappropriate, doesn't mean you then dismiss the rest of what they have you do.
Yeah. It's interesting. I see in the chat, Disco Burner, I think, is sensing, wow, we've got a potential we've got a potential kid here who can see the future, and if he's probably thinking, I am not an ADHDer, so all I need is a financial tip from SJJ here, and I could go and invest in it. And so I do actually have some. I'll tell you what I'm going to do with my money if I get it. I'm going to. This is not financial advice, but if I get it, I'm going to stick it on a couple of stocks, actually, and try and take some risk. I've actually been researching investing in the stock market and things like this. You don't have to answer, Luke. Do you invest in the stock market?
I don't invest in individual stocks. Because I'm 57. If I was in my 20s,
I get it. Yeah,
in my 20s, I'd be more adventurous.
Absolutely. Well, I've begun to learn about stocks and investing in stocks, and so I'm guessing that you have some investments. You'd have to confirm or deny that you have some investments in a passive index fund or a portfolio that's a mixture of index funds and bonds or something like that.
Yeah, very conservative, modest amounts of investment. So I invested in an I bond where you're guaranteed from the US Treasury a rate of return that exceeds inflation.
Understandable, yeah. So, but somebody my age should be looking to maybe take some risks. Certainly, if I've just like get a bit of money that I can just dump on something that I didn't have yesterday, I'm at a position where I'm more able to take a risk with it, and so I'm gonna dump it all, probably on two stocks, which would be Rocket Lab and Palantir, if I'm going to dump it all on, and then I can get in before they go to the moon, which is my prediction. Which one says Disco Burner? Rocket Lab, RKLB, and Palantir, PLTR. But don't take that as financial advice. But that's what I'm going to do with my money. 100x coming soon.
And it is part of your thinking here that you want a source of excitement in your life, and seeing these stocks bounce up and down is going to provide you with excitement.
Well, part of that, but also I was never taught about investing. I was never taught about the stock market. They didn't teach this in schools. None of my friends ever told me about it. I've had to I know it sounds stupid, but I've had to discover this thing for myself, that it's a thing, and that somebody like me, who's, I think it's known in the game as a retail investor, can just turn up to something like eToro or Invest Engine or something like that on the internet and just buy fractions of stocks with even $10 if you've got it. And so And then I've decided to become more sensible about it and research it, and I've learned all about passive index funds, so like putting money on the S&P 500 or an emerging market ETF and all this kind of stuff. I'm finding it absolutely fascinating. In fact, if anybody is interested in this stuff, I know lots of people in your chat. I know you've got a few financial bros in there I've seen in the past. I don't know if they're in now, who'll know far much more than I do. But I'm finding it interesting learning about it. There is a YouTuber on the internet who's actually an exciting guy. He does really good content called Patrick Boyle.
Yes.
Boyle. He is a former hedge fund manager, and he's really funny as well. And so I've been like just watching Patrick Boyle videos and loads of this. But my research isn't limited to that. I've also been reading about financial markets and stuff and realizing that what I do need to do is I do need to start saving for the future now. I'm at that stage where I really do need to start doing that. Whilst also I'm aware that I'm at that age where I can take some risks. So, and that really, somebody like me who is not a high earner, I mean, like a minimum earner, the only way that I would be able to have like huge, positive finances in the future is if I do take some gambles that pay off. So,
okay, let me challenge that.
Yes.
So, you said the only way that you're going to be financially set is if you take some gambles, and I would challenge you that a more likely way that you will be in a good financial position is if you learn to adjust your ego to serving the priorities of an employer.
Yeah, but the problem with that, Luke, first I have to find one, then I have to be good at, be able to, it's not easy. I mean, there's not a lot of opportunities for somebody like me, so that's easy to say. But even if I find another employer, I mean, I have to ask who is going to employ me with a high earning position to do what? This is like an insurmountable task to just try and come up with. Who is going to employ somebody unskilled with a high wage or something like this? So I don't see a route to high earning employment at the moment, is what I'm trying to say. So my income is almost certainly going to be low, probably for the next decade or something like that.
And do you have any personality issues with being of service to an employer? Are you willing to subjugate your own whims and your own ego to meeting the priorities of an employer?
Oh, absolutely. If I could earn good money, or there was a route towards it, absolutely. But
so how quickly would you have to get rewards before you're willing to subject yourself to the priorities of an employer?
Well, not super quickly. I'm not somebody who, the implication behind what you're saying is that I could just go and find some other job, Luke, that I could end up on a path to higher earning, but it's not as simple as that for something like me. I think what you're doing is showing your privilege of being high IQ, to be honest. I'm not going to lie here. I think you're underestimating what, the position that somebody like me is in for really what I can offer.
I think what I'm doing is pointing out that it is our character. It is our personality. It is our inclination to be of service to other people. If you have an attitude of wanting to be of appropriate levels of service to others, so don't, be overly serving others, in an inappropriate way, but adjust your priorities to those of an employer and to, facilitate your relationships, help other people moderately, that if you have an effective mindset where you're happy to subjugate your own whims and personality, to that of an employer, and to make your employer's interests your interests, that type of personality is highly likely to have a successful life. The same type of personality will take a spouse's interests into account, will take a friend's interests into account, will take his community's interests into account. And so someone who is able to subjugate himself to his own greater good by taking other people appropriately into account is going to be much more set for success in life, while someone who does not take his employer's interests into account, someone who does not take a spouse's interests into account, or his community's interests into account, or extended families into account, and just does what he wants, is doomed to a life of failure.
But how do I manifest this into higher earning is the question. I mean, explain it to me like I'm stupid, Luke. I mean, I do have a job at the moment. I'm good at it. I'm well valued. Management love me. I'm useful. But at the end of the day, in 10 years' time, it's still only going to pay the equivalent of a McDonald's wage. Is the problem.
Right. So what's the most common critical feedback that you've received over the course of your life? Not just in the workplace, but in general. Or you can use a friend. You can say, a friend, I know this guy, and the most common critical feedback he's received is this.
I don't know. I don't know I honestly don't know, to be honest. I honestly don't know. That sounds terrible, doesn't it? That might be that I'm oblivious to feedback, actually, Luke. Is that the point that you're making? Maybe
I don't know, but it does sound on the surface as though you're oblivious to feedback. But for every piece of critical feedback that you or I have received, there have been 20 times as many examples of the behavior that people are objecting to, but most people just can't be bothered to call us out for the crap that we're doing. But if we are taking into account other people, for example, I'm thinking of one friend. He's got a very loud motorcycle, and when he starts up his motorcycle in a cul-de-sac, everybody in that cul-de-sac is bothered by it. And I tried to talk him into wheel your motorcycle out of the cul-de-sac and then start it so that you cause less disruption to the lives of people around you. And so that's an example of taking other people into account. So when you take other people into account, you're just much happier and much more successful in life. Another way of posing the question I posed to you is, what are examples when you've received the most humiliation? Because when we don't take other people into appropriate levels of account, we will inevitably be absolutely humiliated.
Yeah, the problem, I get your psychoanalyzing. The problem is I just don't see how. Maybe, look, the biggest criticism that I've ever had, is that I'm stupid, that I'm low IQ, that I'm an idiot. Okay. This is the thing that I've gone, and I'm acutely aware that I'm not as smart as everybody else. Now I can fake it for a bit. I can, but not. I can prepare a few talking points and come on a live stream and maybe sound somewhat articulate for a little while. But
what you're saying is that you're consistently coming across to people who know you well as a moron.
Probably, yeah.
And how much success do you think you're going to have in life as long as you persist in the behavior and words that lead people to think you're a moron?
No, I get it, but what I'm afraid of, Luke, is that I actually am the more I'm a moron. This is the problem. This is the danger.
You're not really afraid of that. You're afraid of the pain of changing, and so you're using the cover that maybe I am really a moron, because the painful truth is that it would require some painful changes that would involve admitting that some of the things you've done in the past were wrong and not suited for your best interests. So you've got this ready-made excuse, maybe I am a moron, because you don't want to change, you don't want to grow, you really don't want to improve the quality of life because you're so comfortable with where you are now, and trying to create something different is way too scary, and so you use the cover, maybe I am just a moron. Because I guarantee you've got an IQ north of 120.
Oh, come off it. I don't think that's true. I don't think I can. I'm always well, yeah. Anyway, yeah.
What
I don't
do
know.
you think? What do you think your IQ is?
I know. I'm probably 100 or something.
I guarantee you it's north of 115. The average university graduate has a 115 IQ. And I think that you're more intelligent than the average university graduate. And you are dramatically underachieving in life.
Well, that'd be a shock if that was the case. Over here they don't do IQ tests.
Well, you can take free ones online very easily.
Yeah, I've done some of those, Luke, and let me tell you about those. So I've done a few of those, and each time I've done them, I've spent about 40 minutes getting to the end, and then it says to me, now you have to pay for it. And I think, what an absolute moron I've been. I've fallen for one of these tricks, and it's just like this is like obvious proof that I am an idiot, that I've fallen for one of these fucking scams. So it's not been a good experience, to be honest.
Okay, let's do one right now. It's the reverse digit test. So I'm going to give you 5 digits, and I'd like you to repeat them back to me in reverse order.
No way.
Okay.
Don't.
Okay, here we go.
Oh my God, no.
6, 8, 1, 4, 3.
3, 4, 1, 8, 6.
Okay, so you have an IQ of at least 100. So I'm going to write down 6 digits this time.
No, we're going to fail. We're going to fail. No, don't do it live on air. Oh my God.
Okay, here we go. I'm going to give you 6 digits, so don't write them down. Just try to remember them in your head.
Yeah.
7, 2, 3, 9, 5, 1.
1, 5, 9, 3, 2, 7.
Okay, so you've got an IQ that's at a minimum 115.
Was that? No way I got that right.
Yes.
Oh my God.
6 digits in reverse order. You've got a minimum IQ of 115.
Well, I'll take it under advisement. I'm still suspicious, but yeah.
What would
Anyway,
what would be the implications if you had an IQ north of 120? How would that change your self-assessment and how you lived your life?
Well, I'm not sure that I could actually turn it into, like manifest it into higher earning, is the issue. So this is a conundrum. Obviously, I feel like I've got a few years to figure this out.
What if you didn't?
Possible? And
what if you didn't? What if the decisions you make over the next 12 months will forever shape the course of your life?
I'm putting all my money on Rocket Lab in that case. I'm joking. I'm going all in on Rocket Lab to the moon.
Why not go all in on Stephen J. James?
Yeah. The problem is, of course, when you get to my age, is you don't have the qualifications, you don't have the experience of doing other jobs like this. Like, I do have a job, and but it's working as a lifeguard at a pool, which isn't really very prestigious, and literally there's not really any advancement. So, and yeah. Anyway, look, this is a conundrum. You've left me with something to think about, Luke.
Okay.
I question your IQ test, I've got to be honest. So,
okay, research reverse digit IQ test. if you
It
want.
was really hard. That was really hard. Does it matter that it was extremely hard and I probably just fluked it?
Well, I'm sure you didn't fluke it, but you may be bumping up at your cognitive level. It might be like seven digits might be your limit. Like my IQ's consistently tested in the 120s, more often in the low 120s rather than the high 120s. So my IQ is around 6 digits to 7 digits as well.
Right. Next time I come on, I'll quiz your brain about how I can turn my really high IQ into higher earning. All
Okay.
right.
Sounds good, mate.
All right. Thanks, Luke.
Cheers, mate.
Thanks.
Cheers. Bye,
See you
bye.
next time.
See
Bye.
ya.
Subject to audit. Not that they're any different than the other people as far as their morality or ethics, but they're not subject to audit. And anybody who's not subject to audit and feels exempt will do things that he should not do.
That's a great point. Anyone who feels that he's exempt from being audited, for being accountable, will do a lot of things that he should not do.
America has a long history of racism. You mentioned the Jim Crow laws. Other places like South Africa had apartheid, and there have been many nations around the world that have obviously participated in racial ideologies and inflicted those on the native population. Do you see a repetition of America's racial past but reversed and kind of flipped onto white people? Are you concerned about what happened to South Africa after the end of apartheid, where many whites were oppressed by the new majority? Do you see some similarities there?
I do in the methodology, but not in the end. And let me explain. So at my campus, there is a separate, like all campuses, a separate graduation ceremony based on race. So every group, after they go to the main graduation, then gets their own Chicano graduation, Native American graduation, Black graduation, no white graduation, obviously. And there are dorms that are segregated by race. And students can pick the racial profile of their dorm member. And there are something called safe spaces that are set aside for race. If a person came from Mars and looked at that and scraped away the veneer that it's progressive and it's repertory and all that, it's racist. And but the difference between here and Rhodesia or something is the white population is in the majority, where it's not 18% of the population is in South Africa. Even today, with declining birth rates, it's about 67 to 70%, number one. And if you look at the Trump phenomenon, it looks like 45 or 50% of Latinos feel conservative and are MAGA voters. And if you break that down, it's because about 70% of working class Latinos without high school or college degrees are fanatically pro-Trump, and they balance out the young college population. So whatever's going on with the effort of the DEI people to racialize things is causing a backlash, which is very stupid because the backlash is growing among the majority of the population. And you're seeing that in the polls, one component. And they're losing people who feel that either they're intermarried with whites or that their values are more red state than blue state. And they don't want to be stigmatized as an angry, segregated minority. So we're really talking about something that's elite driven. It's something in the media and the university where it was created. And it's a top-down phenomenon. It's mostly driven by careerism. It's the Claudine Gay type of, well, I'm going to call people racist, and then people will give me an exemption from my plagiarism, and then I'm going to get it to be president of Harvard. I'll never have to do the type of scholarly work that a full professor in the Ivy League must do, and you can't criticize me or you're racist. That's the type of attitude that is, it's not quite like South Africa, where you have a huge ethnic bloc that says we're taking over the farms, we're taking over.
So listening to Victor Davis Hanson's critique of these pro-Palestine campus protests, and it reminded me of that song released, what was it, about a year ago by Jason Aldean, Try That in a Small Town. Imagine these pro-Palestine protests taking place in a small town. Sucker punch somebody on a sidewalk, carjack an old lady at a red light, pull a gun on the owner of a liquor store. And remember, overwhelmingly, the pro-Palestine protests are not engaging in anything like this, but there is a significant level of graffiti, of antisocial behavior, of preventing the normal operation of a campus. You think it's cool? Well, act a fool if you like. Cuss out a cop, spit in his face. Yeah, there's a lot of anti-cop animus on the part of the pro-Palestine crowd. Stomp on the flag and light it up. You think you're tough. Well, try that in a small town. See how far you make it down the road. Around here, we take care of our own. You cross that line, it won't take long for you to find out. I recommend you don't try that in a small town. Got a gun that my granddad gave me. They say one day they're going to round up. Well, that might fly in the city. Good luck. Try that in a small town. See how far you make it down the road. So I would say with all illegal protests and criminally violent behavior, try that in a small town where people take care of their own.
Companies, not at least that hasn't happened yet, and it's a little different. The picture that people see abroad is basically the bi-coastal elite, but 50 miles within where I live, I would say most of the Mexican American people in my town, where 85% are Mexican American, males especially, they're very conservative. And I'd say the whites are here are ultra conservative, and I would say 99.9% of them are armed, and they don't take crap off anybody. And we don't have that type of violence out here. If somebody tried to take over the city council and wave a Palestinian flag, I wouldn't want to be that person. It would be a very dangerous thing to do. And so that's true of a lot of the interior of the United States. And I think people abroad don't quite understand that this administration is historically unpopular. It was a bastard Faustian bargain that gave, after January 6th, it demonized Donald Trump, and it furthered this Faustian bargain with this decrepit man was going to be a construct.
Okay, there's a comment in the chat. 40 set me up with a Shabbat meal. Well, to the extent that I've been lonely and isolated in any community I've joined, that's overwhelmingly been as a result of my behavior. So if one is not getting invitations, and there have been long stretches of my life where I have not suffered from an abundance of social invites, this is a reflection of me or of you. We are consistently acting in a way that other people find disturbing. And if we instead act in a way that is friendly and calm and appropriate, then we will get a normal number of social invitations. But if we're lonely, if other people are distancing from us, it's because we are engaged in behavior that other people find off-putting.
And then the left wing would come out of the woodwork, Bernie Sanders, the Obamas, the squad, and try to run it through this veneer of old Joe Biden. And this is an aberration in American history, and the types of things they have done have never had any popularity. They've been carried through by the media, the corporate world, the entertainment world, the foundational world, the academic world, and they've all been very unpopular. And this is why the November rendezvous, the accounting is getting the left so.
So why do we have much more vigorous law enforcement with regard to these pro-Palestine protests than with regard to the George Floyd protests? And in large part, it's because Jews are an effective, organized community that speaks up for its own interests, while the majority of Americans weren't able to effectively organize and apply pressure in their own interests to curtail the George Floyd riot. So maybe there is something to be learned from groups effectively exercising their interests, right? The AARP, American Association of Retired Persons, highly effective lobby, right? There are all sorts of highly effective lobbies. There are all sorts of groups that are highly effective. It's worth noticing, what are they doing that makes them so effective?
Paranoid almost every day. It's Donald Trump is a dictator. It's a bloodbath. We're going to put him in jail, because they feel that the whole country is looking at the campuses, the agenda of the left, and another development that it's rarely reported in Europe. We have the largest number of policemen who are being killed in any year in history. And just yesterday, 3 of them were killed. The day before, 2. And the big city law enforcement are being slaughtered. And no one talks about it, much less the president. So this is all well known to people. And they're saying this leftist project did not work, and it has to be replaced. And the left knows it. And they're very desperate to do something.
So there's a big article in the Washington Post over the weekend. College students are dropping out in droves. A new AI tracks college students who are missing classes, running out of money, or just feeling lonely. So I would expect that a majority of the maladaptive behavior occurring either on the pro-Israel side or the pro-Palestine crowd comes from people who aren't cutting it. And those who benefit from affirmative action, right, are going to be less likely to be able to cut it. Right? Objective test scores are about the best legal indicators we have for how someone would do at university. So if you're struggling at university, right, what's going to be more appealing to you? to be tested or to start riots that may delay or change the tests, the exams that you are facing?
Other than rely on the ballot box to retain power.
We'll get on to Trump in a bit. I just want to focus on the issues we've been talking about for now. You talk about the backlash against the anti-white.
Also looking at the Washington Post this weekend, there's a book review. Brittney Griner's Ordeal Riveted the Nation. All right, she was the female basketball player who was caught with drugs in Russia and imprisoned. I don't know about you, but her ordeal did not rivet me. I didn't notice it riveting the people around me. So when you get much of your sense for how the world works from the mainstream media, right, you're very likely to be getting a highly distorted version of reality. New York Times, widening racial disparities underline the rise in child deaths in the U.S. New research find that death rates among black youths soared by 37% and among Native American youths by 22% between 2014 and 2020, compared with less than 5% for white youths. So what happened in 2014? We got the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, which significantly intimidated law enforcement from doing their job. We had reduced law enforcement. We had reduced incentives for police to do their job. We had reduced incentives for holding people accountable for their behavior. And for a small proportion of black life and a small proportion of Latino life and a small proportion of white life, people who were inclined to risky or illegal behavior, they rationally saw that there were fewer incentives against them to abide by the law. And so they start engaging in much more risky behavior, right? The rise of Black Lives Matter and our elite support for Black Lives Matter massively incentivized the institutions in America that hold people accountable, such as the police, to stop doing their job. As a result, a lot of people started behaving much worse. And as a result, you got some widening racial disparities, right? We had a dramatic increase in pedestrian deaths, driver deaths, drunk driving deaths, and we have a massive rise in child deaths because when people behave recklessly, right, other people die or they themselves die.
Or the DEI ideology. Do you think that there's a danger that by calling white people privileged, by attacking white people, by having all these stereotypes, that a certain amount of white people say, well, actually, I am a white nationalist. I don't like other races. I'm proud of my race. To what extent is that phenomenon happening, the kind of white nationalist backlash to this endless anti-white racism that's been happening over the last decade?
I haven't seen that today. I would call it more of a monastery of the mind. What's happening is the people in East Palestine who were poor whites, that type of population, or middle-class whites, they have thrown up their hands, and I think it's been underreported. It's the largest migration in American history.
Right. If you got consistent hatred directed against your group, that's going to fuel rage. And if you have affirmative action, which operates against your group interests, right, that's going to fuel rage. And so if you put out there that racial identity is a great thing, if you're Black or if you're Asian American or Mexican American or Nicaraguan American, having a strong racial identity is a wonderful thing. But if your ancestors are from Europe, then having racial identity is a terrible thing. Some people are going to take grave exception to that.
History, much bigger than the Oklahoma diaspora or the exodus out of the Old South after the Civil War into Arkansas, Oklahoma, that kind of West. It's a huge, California is losing 280,000 people a year to Nevada, to Florida, to Texas, to Wyoming, to Idaho. And so what the so-called white population.
So I released a short video recently that noted I'm not really a flag waver. I prefer to be an observer. And Brandon, who's in the chat right now, said, that's okay, 40. You know, most people are cowards just like you. Well, I don't think desisting from activism to play to one's strengths as an observer is necessarily the coward's way out, right? There are many strategic and logical and sensible reasons to restrain oneself from engaging in activism. What did my father think of Judaism? He thought that Judaism was fulfilled in the person of Jesus Christ, and he thought it was a fossil, but he thought it was far better than being an atheist. So prior to me, my father had not known any Jews. I was the first Jew he knew once I converted to Judaism in 1993.
Is doing, it's saying, I'm had it, I'm not going to pay taxes and then be insulted for all these social programs that are poorly run, or the homeless in San Francisco, or the public schools that are dangerous. So I'm just leaving. And I'm going to a red state where things work. And that turns out in many cases that the population in the red states are more white than not. The big thing that the left doesn't want to talk about, of course, is class. Because if you look at the per capita income of various ethnic groups that are not characterized as white, such as Chinese American, Japanese American, Arab American, Pakistani American, Indian American from India, I think 16 of them have higher per capita income than people who identify solely as white. And so there's a big disconnect in one sense. And if you look at other statistics, what's the greatest number of people who have been killed both per capita and in numbers by fentanyl? 100,000 whites. What is the one major group whose longevity has been static or dropped? Whites. What group has a doubles the per capita suicide rate than blacks and Latinos? Whites. And so what the racial industry does not want to talk about is class, because they're scared about it. But what's interesting about this backlash, there are people who...
There was a revealing profile of Laura Loomer in the Washington Post, and in it she says, "I don't really have much of a life. I'm happy to dedicate all my time to helping Trump, because if Trump doesn't get back in, I don't have anything." I mean, that's just heartbreakingly sad. It's like men who've retreated to the cave waiting for the apocalypse. Throughout her career, Laura Loomer struggled openly with the sense that she's been robbed of the better paid, more respected position that she thinks she deserves in the right-wing media apparatus just because people don't like her. Well, if one thinks this, it's much more adaptive to try to understand, why do people think this? What is it that I'm doing? What is it that I'm saying that is causing other people to want to distance themselves from me? Laura's constantly trying to land the job or the scoop that will give her life some stability. There's no external job, there's no external scoop that is going to give Laura Loomer's life stability. It will require her to make some internal changes, right? There's no external solution for an internal problem. There's no non-spiritual solution to a spiritual problem. There's no non-medical solution for a medical problem. Laura Loomer says, "Donald Trump is hope for me. I don't feel like I have anything in my life." Now, this is heartbreaking. "I got canceled everywhere for what? Speaking the truth?" No, she got canceled for being disturbing. "They treat me like a criminal." Why have people treated Laura Loomer like a criminal? Because she has consistently behaved in ways that disturb people. "Half the world thinks I'm a Nazi. I didn't do anything wrong." Well, if you're frustrated in life and not succeeding in life, taking the attitude that I didn't do anything wrong is not likely to serve you, as opposed to contemplating where you may have made some mistakes, what you can learn from them, and feel the pain of those mistakes, like drain all the meaning out of your mistakes, and then contemplate more productive paths forward and work them out in your mind, how they're likely to play out, and then start making internally directed changes.
Who were saying to Latinos, you have about as much in common with the UC professor or the Stanford activist or the anchor woman on PBS than the East Palestine person has with Bill Gates, or the black person in the inner city has with Oprah. And you're just, I've never seen that before in America. The left has been so good demagoguing race, but they are paranoid that they're going to lose large segments of the minority communities who are going to vote on the issues of class. And if that were to happen, because they have completely lost the white working class, and whites in general are about 65% Republican, they're not going to win elections. And that's why they have to double down on racism, and what we're seeing on the campuses. But one of the subtexts is there is a great fear that people are tired of these people. And the left has not produced, at least in terms of people that are not white, based on their class. It's been very good for DEI apparat, for careerists in the media who claim that they're 1/8 this and 1/10 this, but not for blacks of the inner city or Mexican-American people under this administration.
Just to get back to the issue of the campus protests, do you think these people have a right to protest? Isn't this an issue of freedom of speech and expression? And
of course they have a right to protest, and of course they have a right to make the case for for Palestine or for stigmatizing Israel. No one serious disagrees with that.
And haven't they got some legitimate concerns in terms of the number of deaths of innocent civilians in Gaza who are being killed by Israel? And obviously the United States has funded a large amount of the Israeli military, or at least recently passed a bill that would allow for billions of dollars in military aid to Israel. So do you think that, first of all, they have a right to protest? This is about freedom of speech. And second of all, the issues that they're protesting about are legitimate?
Yeah, I think they do. And so there have been protests where they go to the city chamber and they ask for a permit and they walk down Avenue of the Americas and they protest and it's over with. Or they say they want a permit to be at the Stanford Quad. But that's not what's happening. Once their permit is over or they do not get it, they don't care. And when they're in Columbia, they've been told to leave because they're shutting down the university graduation ceremony that's planned. That's what they like to do. So last night they went into Hamilton Hall and just renamed it and occupied it and broke through. And that's what's happening. So at Stanford University, if they see posters of hostages, they tear them down, or they don't leave when they're told to leave. So it's not just that peaceful. Yes, they have a right for peaceful protest. There's a couple of other things, though. They're protesting America's help to the IDF war against Gaza, but there's three things I think everybody should keep in mind. October 7th, there were 12,000 people, 1,200 mutilated, beheaded, raped, tortured, killed. The IDF did not go into Gaza till the 27th. There was about 3 weeks. These protests did not start when the IDF went into Gaza. They changed the tempo. They were protests of exhilaration. The Cornell professor said he was exhilarated. The Stanford professor who told the Jews to go to one side. The desecration of monuments, shutting down bridges. These were triumphalists. Look what we did to the Jews. It only changed into violent when the IDF reacted. Number two is their concern is about a Muslim population that is being oppressed or killed by a majority non-Muslim. They have never said a word about the Uyghurs. We have all sorts of commercial ties with the Chinese government. They never say that. Stanford students don't go over to Apple and say, not in my name will you do business and profit in the billions with China when they've got 1 million Muslims in the Uyghur camps. Or they don't say to the Russians before they went into Ukraine, how dare you level Chechnya in the second Chechen war, and you went into these Chechen cities and you destroyed them. How dare you do? They don't do that. Not at all. They're protesting really against Jews. So they apply a standard to Israel that they don't apply to any other. They never say a word about what the Assads are doing in Syria to their own populations. They never said anything about Gaddafi. It's only because it's Israel. And number three, when Israel was attacked, when you talk to these protesters, and I have, they don't understand that Gaza was autonomous. It's against the law for a Jewish person to go into Gaza without the permission of the government. You can't live in Gaza if you're Jewish. They've all been ethnically cleansed since 2005. Hamas had one election one time. It's a total dictatorship. In other words, they keep saying, we want reciprocity, but of course, there's 2 million Arabs with full constitutional rights that vote and hold office in Israel. But you can't have one Jew in Gaza. It's against the law. And so if you're going to go into Gaza and find the people who did this on October 7th, who say they're going to do it 10, 20, 100,000 times again, as the leaders did it from Beirut, then you get into urban warfare. So then you look at the calculus of urban warfare. And that goes most recently to what the Russians did in Chechnya, or what they're doing in Ukraine, or what the Americans did at Mosul. I was embedded twice in Iraq, what they did in Fallujah. And then you ask yourselves, what are the rough ratios between an enemy combatant killed and a civilian killed? And I think most people would say that the Israeli government has a better record of killing more militants per collateral damage than the Americans or the Chinese or the Russians did.
Okay, here's an old clip of Victor Davis Hanson being accused of
introduction. I've spent most of my life as a classicist, and it's a very strange profession. One time I was asked to speak on immigration, of all things, to a House caucus committee. And as I was beginning, I was introduced as a classicist, and a young aide to Nancy Pelosi got up and said, "See, he's a racist because he believes in class oppression." And I said, "I don't believe in class oppression." He said, "Well, you're a classicist, you must." And I tried to explain that classics was the classicus is a Latin word meaning the study of classic things of a higher meaning they're older and more renowned. For that very kind introduction.
Okay, Victor Davis Hansen, talk to you